Welcome, wanderer of the night. As you settle into your chair, dim the lights, and let the silence settle around you, I want you to imagine a world older than every kingdom you have ever heard of. Older than Rome, older than Egypt's golden dynasties, older even than the stories written in the earliest holy books. Tonight, we travel back over 4,000 years into the heat-soaked cradle of civilization, where the first cities rose from mud brick and ambition, and where the first healers learned to treat wounds, soothe fevers, and battle demons long before the word medicine even existed. But before you step into that ancient world, I want you to hold on to an image. It's late at night, in a Mesopotamian home built of clay and straw. A sick child lies sweating on a reed mat. A bowl of water trembles in the dim firelight. Outside, the desert wind sighs like a breath from something unseen. And in the doorway stands a man wearing a cloak embroidered with symbols, part healer, part priest, part exorcist. His face is stern, his eyes alert. Tonight, he is not here to fight a disease. He is here to fight a demon. If stories like this pull you in, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this journey into the darkest corners of ancient history. Now, let us begin. 4,000 years ago, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was the shimmering heart of humanity. The place we now call Iraq was once the ancient world's masterpiece, Mesopotamia. Under its blazing sun, the first cities, Uruk, Ur, Nippur, Lagash, rose toward the heavens like stairways made for gods. Their ziggurats dominated the horizon, layered mountains built by human hands. The air always smelled faintly of mud brick, incense, river reeds, and distant fires. People here lived with an unbroken awareness of the supernatural. Every gust of wind, every shadow flicker, every fever, every strange dream, everything had meaning. If your head hurt, it wasn't because of dehydration or stress. It was because the spirit whispered inside your skull. If your stomach churned, it wasn't spoiled food. It was a ghost tugging on your guts. If your child screamed in the night, it wasn't a nightmare. No, it was a demon crouching on their chest. And in this world of ever-present spirits, illness was not a natural event. It was a supernatural attack. Imagine living in a city where the gods were the only doctors most people trusted. Priests read omens from the livers of sacrificed animals. They studied shifting patterns in smoke. They believed every cough carried a message from a restless spirit. Fear wasn't just cultural, it was woven into the brickwork of life itself. And because life was so fragile, famines, floods, and wars with rival cities could strike at any moment, people clung to rituals for protection.
This was a world where the veil between the living and the supernatural felt painfully thin. Picture the people of Mesopotamia moving through their daily routines, women grinding barley by hand, their arms toned from years of repetition, fishermen dragging nets heavy with river carp, scribes bending over clay tablets, carving wedges into wet clay, potters shaping jugs smooth as river stones, farmers guiding wooden plows bowled by oxen, all under the constant gaze of their gods, Anu, Enlil, Inanna, Marduk, watching from above. To them, the gods weren't distant beings. They were neighbors. Angry neighbors. Easily offended, demanding tribute, ready to punish with storms or droughts or sickness for the slightest mistake. When illness struck, it meant someone had sinned, someone had provoked a spirit, or someone had been cursed. And the only hope was to call a healer. one who understood the invisible world. Because in Mesopotamia, healing was never just physical. It was spiritual warfare. The city streets of Ur at dusk were hauntingly beautiful. Narrow alleys cast long shadows, oil lamps flickered behind wooden doors, and the scent of incense drifted from temple courtyards. As darkness fell, fear grew. Without modern lights, nighttime transformed the world. The people believed demons moved freely in darkness, sliding through cracks in walls, hovering at windows, hiding in dust and corners. So at night, families did not sleep easily. They whispered protective prayers, left bowls of water near doors to trap wandering spirits, and hung clay plaques of Pazuzu, yes, the demon later used in The Exorcist, because even though Pazuzu was a demon, he protected humans from far worse ones, especially the terrifying Lamastu, who hunted pregnant women and newborns. In homes where sickness lingered, the atmosphere was heavy. Clay jars of herbs sat near beds, along with charms, amulets, and freshly molded figurines representing demons and gods. These weren't decorations. They were weapons in the battle against invisible forces. Inside the humble home of a merchant near the edge of Ur, a typical sick room would have been dim, but alive with tension. A servant might sit fanning the patient, hoping to push back both heat and spirits. A family member would mix crushed garlic with beer, hoping it would break the fever. Someone else stirred a pot of river clay and bitter herbs, boiling them to smear on the body. The smell of smoke, sweat, and incense lingered constantly. But when nothing worked, when the fever rose, when the patient muttered nonsense, when their eyes rolled back or their limbs shook, everyone knew the truth. This was no ordinary sickness. This was something darker.
A whisper would pass through the house. Call the Asu, or worse, call the Asipu. The Asu were the practical healers, more like doctors. They used plants, oils, bandages. But the Asipu were something else entirely. They were the ones who faced demons, the ones who read omens, chanted incantations, and performed exorcisms. They were feared and respected in equal measure. Neighbors would watch from doorways as an Asipu approached a home. He might carry a staff carved with symbols, a pouch filled with sacred herbs, and a bundle of clay tablets containing rituals passed down over generations. Children whispered stories about them. Adults avoided calling them unless absolutely necessary. Because calling an Asipu meant admitting the presence of evil. Their arrival was dramatic every time. The clink of amulets, the scent of burning myrrh, the low murmur of ancient words. The Asipu did not simply treat illness, they battled it. To them, a fever wasn't heat in the blood, it was a demon of fire clawing at the victim from within. A cough wasn't a symptom, it was the sound of a demon trying to escape. And they believed these things completely. But to understand why, you must understand how the Mesopotamians saw their universe as a vast, chaotic battlefield where humans were helpless unless protected by rituals and divine intervention. Life was fragile, death was everywhere, and demons were blamed for almost all misfortunes. To walk through a Mesopotamian city at night was to walk through a world alive with unseen threats. Ghosts were believed to roam freely if they were not buried properly. Demons lurked in abandoned buildings, riverbanks, graveyards, and even inside clay jars. Pregnant women weren't allowed to walk alone at dusk. Men avoided going near the city walls after dark, fearing shadow spirits. People slept with protective charms beside them, little clay figurines, rings etched with symbols, and small carvings of lions or scorpions meant to scare spirits away. Fear shaped medicine deeply. And yet, from this fear came knowledge. Because even though Mesopotamian healers looked to spirits first, they were also among the earliest people to ask practical questions about illness. They recorded symptoms meticulously on clay tablets. They experimented with herbs. They observed wounds and infections. They created the first pharmaceutical recipes known in human history. Medicine, as we know it today, was born in this blend of terror and curiosity. As the first empires rose, so did the reputations of healers. A good Asu could become wealthy. A powerful Asipu could become legendary, even feared by kings. In temple archives, tablets describing healing rituals were kept locked away, protected like treasure. Only the chosen could learn the words and gestures needed to battle demons. You can imagine the scene inside a temple school, young apprentices sitting on straw mats, carving cuneiform tablets, trying desperately to memorize complex incantations. Their teachers, stern, intense, demanding, reminded them constantly that failure wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. A ritual spoken incorrectly could anger a demon. A wrong offering could make a curse worse. To them, this wasn't superstition. This was survival. As night fell on the ancient world, families huddled in their tiny homes, hoping the darkness did not bring sickness. In the distance, the temple of the city glowed faintly with firelight. Priests performed rituals to protect the land. And somewhere, in a dim corner of a home where a child cried in delirious fever, a family waited for the demon doctor, the Asipu, to arrive. The world of ancient Mesopotamian healing was shaped by fear, faith, ritual, and the unseen. Yet it also laid the foundation for the medical systems we rely on today. In the earliest hours of dawn, when a thin line of gold cut across the Mesopotamian sky and the desert breeze carried the comforting scent of wet clay from the riverbanks, a different kind of healer began his day. He was not a priest. He did not whisper to spirits or summon gods in the dead of night. He did not carry ritual staffs or cast out demons from trembling households. His name was whispered with less fear, but often with equal hope. He was the Asu, the world's first practical physician, a man who treated wounds, set broken bones, mixed medicines, and tried to understand the human body long before science had a name. Imagine him stepping out of his small clay home as the sun rose over the rooftops of Ur or Nippur. His clothing was simple compared to the richly decorated robes of the priestly class. He carried no staff carved with supernatural symbols. Instead, wrapped in linen, he held knives made of copper, a pouch filled with herbs, a small clay jar of oil, and a bundle of reed bandages, tools that came not from the gods, but from the earth, tools shaped not by rituals, but by generations of careful observation. For the Asu, medicine was a craft, an inherited skill, a secret knowledge passed from master to apprentice through long days in the workshop, skin-shaking nights in sick rooms, and countless encounters with pain, blood, fever, and death. To him, illness was not always a demon's punishment. Sometimes it was the result of a simple cause: heat, exhaustion, contaminated water, injuries, infections, even insect bites. These were not mysteries to be solved through omens. They were problems to be treated with the steady hands of a healer. But make no mistake, being an Asu was far from simple. He lived in a world ruled by gods and haunted by spirits. His work existed in a dangerous middle ground, too practical to be divine, too earthly to fully escape suspicion. When a patient died, families sometimes blamed him.
When a patient lived, they credited the gods. And so the Asu walked a narrow line, trying to help people while never overstepping the boundaries set by the powerful priestly healers, the Asipu.
Yet the Asu was indispensable. Without him, Mesopotamia might never have taken the first steps toward the medicine we know today. Picture him arriving at his workshop, a dim room with shelves made of reeds lashed together by rope. Clay jars lined the walls, each marked with symbols indicating their contents: crushed myrtle, mustard seeds, garlic paste, beer mash, honey, bitumen, and rare imported ingredients like cedar oil from Lebanon. Hanging from the ceiling were strips of dried herbs, bundles of reeds, and small animal bones used for grinding medicines. On a low table sat a stone mortar and pestle, stained from years of crushing leaves and roots into salves and ointments. The Asu's hands were always stained with something: dark oil, green herb dust, reddish clay from poultices, or coppery smudges from his tools. He was, in every sense of the word, a working man. As he mixed his morning preparations, the first patient of the day would often arrive. Perhaps it was a laborer from a nearby field, limping heavily, sweat still clinging to his skin and dust darkening his hair, his ankles swollen from stepping into a hidden burrow. Or maybe it was a fisherman with deep cuts in his hands from pulling nets made coarse by sun and salt. The Asu examined their wounds, cleaning them with warm water, pressing gently, judging the severity from experience carved into his mind over decades. He knew how muscles stretched, how joints worked, how bones felt under the skin. He had learned these things not from gods, but from life. He would prepare a paste of crushed garlic and honey, one of the earliest antibacterial mixtures known to humanity. He smeared it onto the wound, wrapped it tightly with linen strips, and murmured only a short phrase of reassurance. No elaborate incantations, no summons to the divine. His power came from his skill, not from spiritual authority. After tending to several injuries, the Asu might be called to a home across the city. A mother might rush to him with a crying child burning with fever. The Asu would follow her into the dim room where the child lay trembling. He would place his hand on the child's forehead, feeling the heat, listening to the breath, watching the eyes. He recognized symptoms with the precision of a man whose success or failure meant life or death. He would brew a bitter drink, a mix of crushed herbs, boiled water, and honey. The child might resist, but eventually swallow. Then the Asu would instruct the family to cool the child's body with water, to let them rest, to keep them shaded. Simple advice, but effective. These were the beginnings of rational medicine. Yet even in these moments, the Asu could not fully escape the shadow of the supernatural, because if the fever grew worse, the family might start whispering, "This is no ordinary illness. This is the work of a demon." And then the Asu's authority weakened. The Asipu would be summoned, the demon doctor, with incantations and smoke and sacred charms.
The Asu accepted this. It was the world he lived in. Still, there were other cases that only he could handle. Broken bones were a regular challenge. Imagine the Asu kneeling beside a man who had fallen from a ladder or been trampled by livestock. The man screams as the Asu gently feels along the limb, identifying where the bone has snapped. He prepares wooden splints, pads them with soft cloth, and binds the limb tightly. His movements are steady, deliberate, calm. The patient's breath slows, trusting him despite the pain. Without such knowledge, the man would be crippled for life. There were also burns, common in a world of open fires, hot ovens, and sun-scorched days. For these, the Asu used oils and poultices to soothe the skin,
often reciting a short prayer as he worked. Not because he believed the prayer cured the wound, but because the patient believed it. Medicine in this era required not only physical skill, but emotional wisdom. The Asu knew how to comfort, how to steady a shaking hand, how to calm a terrified family. His presence was practical, grounding. Where the Asipu handled the unseen, the Asu handled the seen, the tangible, the flesh and blood world. Yet, there were moments when the two types of healers collided. Imagine a nobleman struck by sudden paralysis. His arm hangs limp, his speech slurs, his face droops. To us, this is a stroke. To ancient Mesopotamians, this was the grip of a demon, perhaps the spirit of a dead enemy or a curse from a neglected deity. The family calls the Asu first, and he recognizes the symptoms immediately. He knows the outcome may be grim, but he does everything he can. Massaging the limbs, applying warm oils, giving herbal mixtures to strengthen the heart. But when these efforts fail, the Asipu is summoned. He arrives with incantation tablets, clay figurines, and ritual tools. As he chants over the nobleman, waving incense smoke in rhythmic patterns, the Asu steps back into the corner of the room. He watches quietly, knowing that the family now sees the illness not as a bodily failure, but as a spiritual attack. This dynamic shaped Mesopotamian medicine in profound ways. The Asu was respected, but he was never the ultimate authority. He was a craftsman, not a priest. Yet he carried within him the seeds of modern healing, the belief that some illnesses had physical causes, that the body could be repaired through knowledge and skill. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Asu's work was the early pharmacology he helped develop. On his shelves were jars containing hundreds of ingredients: seeds, leaves, saps, clays, minerals, oils. Mesopotamian healers recorded over 800 medicinal recipes, written in neat cuneiform, combining substances that still appear in modern medication. They understood that honey prevented infection, that mint settled the stomach, that certain clays drew out inflammation, that oils soothed irritation. The Asu was more scientist than sorcerer, though he would never have used such a word. Picture him at night, sitting in his workshop, grinding a new mixture under the dim glow of an oil lamp. His hands move rhythmically, guided not by divine whispers, but by memory, by observation, by trial and error. He tests a salve on his own skin, searching for itch or burn. He adjusts the mixture, grinding, stirring, tasting. Each new remedy is a tiny victory against the vast unknown. He keeps records, simple but effective notes pressed into wet clay, a list of plants, a list of symptoms, a list of treatments. He does not know he is shaping the earliest medical textbooks in human history. He is simply doing what he must to help the sick. But even with all his knowledge, the Asu was limited by the world he lived in. When supernatural fear ruled, the Asu stepped aside. When a patient screamed in delirium, their family did not always trust herbs or oils. They trusted rituals, gods, charms, and demons. And so the Asu learned to coexist with the mystical, even when he believed his medicine stood on firmer ground. There were moments, however, when the Asu witnessed things that shook even his rational understanding. Moments when a patient's breath stopped suddenly, when screams erupted without cause, when a shadow seemed to move in the corner of a dim room, when a body stiffened as if gripped by invisible hands. And in those moments, even he wondered whether demons really lurked behind the veil of illness. By the time the sun set over the city, the Asu returned home exhausted. His hands were sore, his back stiff, but his mind remained sharp. He lit a small oil lamp, sat on a reed mat, and reviewed his day. Sometimes he carved new notes onto clay tablets. Other times he simply stared at the flame, thinking of the patients he could not save, the wounds he could not mend, the sicknesses he could not explain. In a world where mortality was constant and fear ever present, the Asu quietly pushed humanity forward. He was the bridge between superstition and science, between demons and diagnoses, between ancient magic and future medicine. But the Asu's world was only half of the story. Night in ancient Mesopotamia came with a weight that pressed on the chest like a sleeping animal. Unlike our world, lit by cities that glow all hours, the darkness of 4,000 years ago was a living thing, thick, breathing, watchful. Shadows stretched long across mud brick walls, oil lamps flickered against the breeze, and rooftops felt like islands floating in a sea of black. When the sun vanished, demons were believed to rise. They slipped between homes, stalked alleyways, brushed against sleeping children, and perched on rafters above resting families. And when something went wrong, when a child screamed in a fevered dream, when a grown man began speaking in voices not his own, when a woman could no longer breathe without gasping like she was drowning, the city whispered a single word: Asipu. He was the one they called when earthly medicine failed, the one who battled forces no one could see, the one who stood between a human soul and the hunger of a spirit. If the Asu was the body's healer, the Asipu was the healer of the unseen, the demon doctor, half priest, half exorcist, half scholar, feared as much as he was trusted.
Imagine him now, walking through a narrow street at night. His silhouette flickers against clay walls as he approaches a home where whispers of terror leak into the night air. He carries a small satchel filled with clay figurines, reed incantation tablets, strands of hair wrapped in linen, goat bones stained from ritual ash, and a bowl for mixing sacred substances. Every item has a purpose. Every movement has meaning. Every breath must follow a ritual rhythm. He pauses outside the home, pressing his palm against the rough clay wall. He listens. Inside, a woman sobs. A man mutters prayers. A child coughs with a voice that sounds too old, too strained, too wrong. The Asipu closes his eyes, whispering a short invocation, not to a single god, but to many, because the demons he faces answer to no mortal hierarchy. Only then does he enter. The door opens to a room lit by a single lamp. The air is thick with incense, frankincense, cedar, myrrh, burning desperately in an attempt to drive away spirits. The Asipu does not rush. He walks with deliberate calm, aware that every eye in the room is fixed on him. Mothers clutch their children tighter. Fathers step aside with a mixture of hope and dread. Even pets hide beneath furniture. The Asipu kneels beside the patient. A young boy trembles on a reed mat, sweat glistening on his skin. His breaths are fast and shallow. His eyes dart beneath closed lids. The Asu, the earthly doctor, has already tried everything. Herbs, cool water, massage, ointments. Nothing worked. So now the family believes the truth they feared most. A demon has entered the boy's body, digging cold, sharp fingers into his spirit. The Asipu touches the boy's forehead with 2 fingers and murmurs a diagnostic incantation. not to cure, but to ask, to invite revelation. He believes, deeply and sincerely, that spirits respond to ritual language. The whispers he utters are not mere poetry. They are words believed to be older than clay tablets, words carved into the universe when the first gods shaped the world. He listens carefully to the boy's breathing, to the crackle of the oil lamp, to the shifting shadows on the wall. Then he opens his satchel. Inside are clay figurines, each representing a different demon. Some are small and crude, others are detailed, with sharp teeth, bulging eyes, twisted limbs, long tongues. He sets them out around the boy in a circle, an ancient diagnostic technique. Each figurine stands for a different threat: nightmares, paralysis, fever demons, shadow spirits, ghosts of the unburied, wind spirits that slipped through cracks at night. When one of the figurines topples slightly, as if nudged by a faint breeze, the family gasps. To them, this is a sign, a supernatural answer, a revelation from the invisible world. The Asipu nods calmly. He has identified the enemy.
To modern minds, this might feel like superstition, but to the Asipu, this was a science of its own, a precise system built from generations of observation mixed with religious belief. Certain combinations of symptoms were associated with certain spirits. Certain nightmares indicated specific demons. Certain types of fevers were linked to particular omens seen in the sky. To the Asipu, the spiritual world had patterns, rules, formulas, and he knew them all. He begins preparing the ritual. First, he crushes a bundle of herbs, mint, wormwood, and a rare bark brought by traders from the north. These are burned in a ceramic bowl. Smoke rises in pale ribbons, swirling above the boy's body. The Asipu waves the smoke with his hands, guiding it over the boy's face, his chest, his limbs. He watches the smoke carefully, for he believes its movements reveal truths, whether the demon is resisting, whether it is strong, whether it is angry. Then he opens a small clay tablet inscribed with an incantation hundreds of years old. The symbols cut into the clay are tiny and precise. There is no room for mistakes. These words, the Asipu believes, were given to humans by Enki, the god of wisdom. They are spells of protection, healing, and banishment. He recites them in a measured tone, his voice deep and rhythmic, each word vibrating through the room like a drumbeat. May the evil one depart. May the shadow lift. May the breath return. By the authority of the gods, leave the flesh you cling to. His voice is calm but commanding. He does not shout. He does not stumble. His every syllable must be perfect. It is believed that a mispronounced word could anger the demon, causing it to tighten its grip or lash out. The family watches in absolute silence. The Asipu takes a small clay figurine, now representing the demon inside the boy, and presses it gently against the child's chest. He holds it there until the boy's trembling begins to slow. Then, with solemn ceremony, he lifts the figurine. The idea is simple, yet chilling. He has tricked the demon into leaving the boy and entering the figurine. Now comes the final step: disposal. The Asipu carries the figurine outside the home. The family follows but keeps distance. They do not want to be near a demon vessel. The Asipu places the figurine on the ground, draws a circle of chalk-like gypsum around it, and crushes the figurine under his heel. The clay shatters with a dry crack. Dust rises.
To the family, that sound is relief, freedom, salvation. Inside the home, the boy's breathing steadies. His fever breaks. His eyelids flutter. The Asipu returns, nodding solemnly, and the room erupts into quiet sobs of gratitude. The mother kisses his hands. The father bows. The Asipu accepts their thanks without emotion. He has done this countless times. He has walked into darkness, battled the unseen, and walked out again. He does not smile. For him, the battle is never truly over. Demons are endless. Rituals are temporary shields. Spirits wait in corners, door cracks, shadows. And he must remain vigilant. What makes the Asipu so fascinating is the duality of his nature. He is both scholar and shaman. He spends his days reading ancient tablets and his nights facing terrors no ordinary person wishes to see. He studies omens, movement of birds in the sky, patterns in the stars, strange shapes in river foam. He memorizes incantations written long before he was born. He guards his knowledge fiercely, passing it only to chosen apprentices. In his private chambers, he keeps a collection of tablets, stone slabs pressed with instructions for rituals, descriptions of demons, lists of symptoms, recipes for protective amulets. These tablets form the earliest manuals on exorcism, predating even biblical references to demon cleansing. They are scientific, poetic, magical, terrifying. One tablet describes an illness caused by a wind demon that enters through the ears. Another details a spirit that slips into the lungs while a person sleeps. One chilling text speaks of a demon that sits on the chest of the sleeping man, constricting the breath until he wakes in terror. Sleep paralysis in modern terms, but to an Asipu, it was a spiritual siege. Every ritual he performs is a rescue mission. Yet despite his power, the Asipu lives carefully. He avoids walking alone near graveyards. He rarely touches newborns, fearing Lamustu's jealousy. He never leaves his home without protective amulets etched with ancient symbols. The very knowledge that gives him power also binds him in constant caution. But inside the temple libraries, he is revered. Apprentice priests treat him with awe. Even kings summon him when dreams grow dark. Dreams, to Mesopotamians, were windows into the supernatural. And when kings dreamed of shadows or serpents or blood, they consulted the Asipu, interpreter of nightmares, guardian of the unseen realm. His authority comes not from herbs or bandages, but from ancient words, words believed to shape reality itself.
Yet the most remarkable thing about the Asipu is how deeply he believed in his work. He did not see himself as a performer of rituals, but as a mediator between humans and the creatures that lived beyond mortal senses. His conviction was absolute, and that certainty gave comfort to families whose lives were ruled by fear of the invisible. Tonight, the Asipu will return home, exhausted. He will remove his amulets, wash his hands with scented oils, and sit in silence near a flickering lamp. Outside, the wind moves softly through the narrow alleys, carrying with it the whispers of the supernatural. Somewhere, a dog growls at nothing. Somewhere else, a baby cries suddenly in the night. The Asipu listens. He knows he will be called again, and soon. Because in a world where illness is believed to be the bite of demons, the scratch of spirits, the breath of ghosts, the demon doctor never rests. Night clung to the city of Nippur like a shroud. The moon hung low, pale and swollen, bathing the mud brick walls in a cold, ghostly glow. Every alleyway felt deeper than usual, every shadow thicker, darker, almost alive. Dogs, usually loud and restless after sundown, were quiet tonight. Even the wind seemed to flow around the houses instead of through them, like it, too, avoided the place where something unnatural had taken hold. In the heart of the city, in a narrow street lined with cracked walls and flickering lamps, a young girl named Lilu lay on her sleeping mat, her body rigid as if carved from stone, her eyes shone unnaturally in the dim light, glassy, unblinking, staring at something no one else could see. Sweat soaked her hair and pooled beneath her neck. Every few moments, her lips twitched as though she whispered to someone only she could hear. Her parents hovered helplessly, whispering prayers to the household gods, begging, bargaining, pleading. But nothing changed. Then, without warning, the girl inhaled sharply, one long, painful breath, and she screamed. Not the cry of a child, something deeper, raw, a sound that seemed to claw at the walls and chill the bones of everyone in the room. Her mother slapped her hands over her mouth to silence her, terrified that neighbors would hear and assume a curse had struck the family. But it was too late. A neighbor had already sent a message. And so, somewhere across the city, the footsteps of the Asipu, the demon doctor, began to echo through the night. He approached the house quietly, but the moment he crossed the threshold, he felt it. A shifting in the air, a pressure that pushed against his chest, a heaviness that did not belong to the living. He had felt this before, many times, and every time he did, he knew what it meant. A spirit was near. Not a gentle ghost, not the lost soul of a forgotten ancestor. Something darker. The Asipu stepped into the dim room, where the only light came from a dying oil lamp. The girl lay still again, but her eyes followed him, slow and deliberate, tracking him like prey. Her mother gasped softly, clutching her husband's arm.
"She has not slept for 2 nights," the father whispered. "She speaks to shadows. She says something is waiting outside her door." The Asipu nodded slowly. These symptoms were familiar. He knelt beside the girl, observing her carefully. Her breathing was uneven, her pupils dilated despite the low light, her limbs stiff, fingers curled inward as if grasping invisible threads. But what drew him most was the faint whisper that escaped her lips, a sound so soft it should have been inaudible, yet somehow it slithered through the silence straight to him. He leaned closer. The girl was murmuring, "He is here, he is here, he is at the door." Her voice was layered, one part hers, one part something much older, much colder. The Asipu inhaled slowly. He recognized the pattern, the cadence. To others, this was madness. But to him, this was a signature. He whispered to the father, "Tell me, did she fall ill after a dream?" The father hesitated, then nodded quickly. 3 nights ago, she said a shadow stood at her door. She said it watched her. Then the next night, the same dream. But last night, she woke screaming. Of course, dreams were often the first doorway, and the demon that haunted doorways, especially the thresholds between waking and sleeping, was one the Asipu knew well. Its name was in the tablets. A spirit known to slip through cracks, hide behind curtains, crawl beneath beds,
hover at doors waiting for fear to open the way. The Girazu, the burning whisperer. The Asipu's expression hardened. This demon did not bring fire, but fever. It did not shout, but whispered. It crept into homes at night, often targeting children, feeding on the heat of their breath and the weakness of their fear. Once inside, it clung to the body, choking sleep, distorting dreams, and turning voices into echoes of the dead. The girl was not just sick. She was possessed. The Asipu reached into his satchel and withdrew a small clay figurine, shaped like a man, hunched with elongated arms, its mouth open in a howl. The family recoiled. They knew the figure represented a demon, but it was necessary for the ritual. It was how the Asipu would give the spirit a vessel to inhabit once expelled.
With calm precision, he placed the figurine beside the girl and began drawing a circle around it using crushed gypsum. The powder shimmered faintly in the lamplight, forming a boundary no demon could cross, or so the ancient teachings said. Moving with rehearsed confidence, the Asipu prepared the room. He extinguished the lamp. Darkness was essential. Demons revealed themselves in absence of light. The family huddled in a corner, trembling, watching the shadow-swallowed figure of the Asipu move like a silhouette against the night. He placed 7 objects before him: a bowl of water, a reed stylus, a small leather pouch, a feather, a carved stone, a fragment of copper, a handful of barley. Each represented a different force: cleansing, writing, secrecy, breath, earth, protection, and offering. All pieces of the ritual's invisible architecture. He began to chant. The words flowed from him effortlessly, but with a weight that made the hair on the family's arms rise. These incantations were ancient, older than most cities, passed down through unbroken generations of Asipu. Each syllable was believed to hold power, a vibration that disrupted spirits, a language demons could not ignore. He spirit of fever, spirit of whisper, spirit who stalks the night. I call you by the name you fear. I call you from the house you cling to. I call you to leave this flesh. As he chanted, the girl's body jerked violently. Her back arched as though invisible strings lifted her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her fingers clawed at the air. Her eyes rolled back, leaving only the whites. Then she screamed, a sound so sharp the mother nearly fainted. The Asipu did not flinch. He raised the bowl of water and sprinkled droplets over the girl, each droplet hissing faintly as though hitting something hot. He pressed the carved stone to her forehead, murmuring more fiercely now. Return to dust, return to shadow, return to the place with no door. Her breathing quickened. The shadows in the room seemed to swirl, as if stirred by unseen wind. Her voice, now layered with another, spat out words he recognized from older tablets. He is ours. The door is open. The Asipu's eyes narrowed. No, he said sharply. I close it now. He pressed the clay demon figurine against the girl's chest. Her body shuddered as though something inside fought back. Then, slowly, slowly, her trembling eased. Her breathing steadied. Her eyes closed fully for the first time in days. The Asipu lifted the figurine. Its once smooth surface now bore faint cracks. The demon had transferred. But the ritual was not complete. He had to destroy the vessel. The Asipu took the figurine outside,
the family following at a fearful distance. In the moonlight, he placed the figurine beneath a large stone slab. He crouched beside it, whispered one final incantation, and then slammed the slab down. The figurine shattered. For a moment, the wind stopped. Then the city exhaled. Inside the house, the girl opened her eyes. They were clear, fully her own. She blinked, confused, then whispered, "Is it morning yet?" Her mother screamed, this time in joy, and rushed to hug her. The Asipu returned, silently packing his tools. He offered no smile, no praise for himself. He simply nodded once, a subtle gesture that said both, "She is saved," and "This is my work." But as he stepped outside to leave, he paused. He looked at the dark corner of the street, where the shadows seemed just a little too thick. His voice dropped to a whisper meant for no human ear. "I know you're still watching." Because demons, as every Asipu knew, rarely traveled alone. And tonight was not the last time he would confront the burning whisperer. It was only the beginning. Before dawn had even brushed its first pale colors onto the horizon, the Asipu was already awake. He sat cross-legged in his dim quarters, a small oil lamp flickering beside him, casting soft, trembling light across the clay tablets spread out on the floor. This was not a temple library. Those were grand, towering archives filled with knowledge gathered over centuries. This was merely the Asipu's private study, a low room with cracked walls, a faint scent of incense that never quite faded, and a single shelf sagging under the weight of clay records. But this cramped, quiet space was where something extraordinary happened. It was where demons were named. The Asipu leaned forward, his fingers tracing the cuneiform marks etched into one of the tablets. For most people, these cuneiform marks were incomprehensible scratches. But to him, they were as alive as the spirits he fought. They told stories, gave warnings, revealed diseases, predicted outcomes. They were the keys to understanding the invisible forces that tormented humanity.
Mesopotamian medicine, if it could be called medicine, was built on these records. The Asipu did not simply guess which spirit haunted a patient. He consulted tablets, studied signs, compared symptoms, and combined spiritual logic with centuries of observations. Diagnosis was a ritual in itself, a blend of scholarship, intuition, and sacred tradition. Tonight he had been called again, not for the fevered girl from before, she was recovering peacefully now, but for a merchant afflicted by something far more troubling, a sudden numbness in the limbs, an inability to speak clearly, and strange visions of a dark river flowing upward instead of down. The symptoms were clustered, unusual, and deeply ominous. The Asipu needed guidance. He lifted another tablet, heavier than the rest. Its surface was stained from years of use, its edges chipped, but its symbols remained sharp and purposeful. This was one of his most treasured possessions, a diagnostic tablet from an elder Asipu long dead, passed down through 4 generations. The edges were carved not with decorative motifs, but with the names of demons known to attack through dreams. He read silently. If the patient sees rivers flowing backward, if his tongue grows thick, and his limbs forget their breath, then the demon of the left-hand path has entered him. He frowned. The demon of the left-hand path, a rare and dangerous spirit associated with misdirection, paralysis, and corrupted breath. hard to lure out, harder to contain. But he needed more certainty. Diagnosis required precision. One wrong assumption, and the ritual could fail. So he turned to another tablet, a fragment broken centuries earlier, but still containing the crucial section describing omen patterns. He murmured as he read, "If the afflicted man sees water in places where there is none, and if his words fall like broken reeds, the spirit of the under-river may be near." Under-river, another water-associated demon. This complicated things. The symptoms overlapped. He had to distinguish between them. He spread 3 tablets before him and studied them the way a general might study maps before battle. Each tablet listed signs, physical and spiritual. Fever with shaking hands, dreams of darkness moving like water, sudden loss of speech, coldness in the fingers and toes, fear of open doors, restless shadows on the walls, whispers heard at night. For modern eyes, these symptoms might sound like a stroke or infection, but for the Asipu, they were markers that needed matching with the right entity. Mesopotamian healers cataloged their demons like scientists charting species.
His gaze focused on the last line of one tablet. The left-hand path demon enters through dreams and hides behind the door. Behind the door. The same symbolism the girl had described. His breath slowed. Perhaps this was not a new demon at all, but a familiar one, a more cunning manifestation of the same presence he had faced before. Spirits often traveled from home to home, exploiting fear like a scent trail. They slipped into cracks in the world, dreams, doorways, dark corners, and the moments between breaths. Still, he needed certainty. Diagnosis in Mesopotamia was not only about reading tablets, it was also about reading the world. So he extinguished the lamp, stepped outside, and looked up at the sky. Stars glittered above him, faint but steady. The moon hung low. Its pale curve was imperfect, shriveled slightly on the left side. An omen. He whispered the interpretation taught to him long ago. If the left side of the moon weakens, beware the spirit who walks crooked paths. The left-hand demon again. He returned inside, lit the lamp, and reached for a small bowl filled with water. He knelt, holding the bowl at eye level, and waited. Water divination was one of the Asipu's most trusted diagnostic tools. If a demon was involved, the surface of the water would betray it, rippling unnaturally, shifting against still air. He breathed once, twice. A single ripple formed, not from wind, not from movement, a ripple that moved inward, toward the center, as if something beneath the water had touched it. He whispered, "Show me your path." The water trembled again, this time quivering in 3 sharp pulses. 3 pulses. Left-hand demons always revealed themselves in 3s. He smiled grimly. The diagnosis was made. But diagnosing a demon was only the first step. The next was preparing the ritual, choosing the correct incantation, assembling the necessary tools. For this, he needed more than tablets. He needed the materials described within them. He took a reed stylus and a fresh slab of clay and began writing a new record. On the night of the waning moon,
The left-hand demon visited the house of the merchant. He came through dreams of rising water and hid behind the breath of the afflicted. The signs were three, as the texts foretell. As he pressed each symbol into the wet clay, he felt the weight of tradition on his shoulders. The Asipu were not merely healers, they were archivists of the unseen. Every case, every sign, every pattern had to be preserved, for demons were patient, ancient, and repetitive. What plagued one generation could return centuries later, wearing the same shadow but hiding in a new form. He consulted yet another tablet, this one smaller, more fragile, with symbols so fine they looked like cracks. It described the proper offering for expelling a left-hand demon. Not food, not water, not blood. Instead, barley placed beneath the patient's head, a feather to carry the breath of the curse away, copper to trap the whisper, words spoken softly lest he flee only to return. He closed his eyes, repeating the sequence in his mind. Barley, feather, copper, whispered incantation. But before performing anything, he needed to read the final diagnostic step, the ritual of the door. The door was sacred in Mesopotamian belief, a threshold between worlds. Spirits lingered there, watching both sides. To diagnose a demon fully, the Asipu had to test the doorway of the afflicted home. He gathered his tools, wrapped the tablets in linen, and walked toward the merchant's house. As he approached, he noticed something unsettling. The door was slightly ajar. No one in Mesopotamia left a door ajar at night. Ever. The merchant's wife met him at the entrance, her voice trembling. "Master Healer, we did not open it, we swear." The Asipu stared at the narrow gap. A faint chill seeped out, brushing his face like breath. He stepped inside carefully. The house was dark, except for one lamp struggling to stay lit. In the center of the room, the merchant sat slumped, eyes half open, lips twitching, body limp as if something were siphoning his strength. The Asipu closed the door behind him. It creaked softly. The sound echoed. The Asipu knelt beside the man and touched his forehead. Cold, unnaturally cold. He reached into his pouch and withdrew a feather and held it above his lips to test his breath. The feather trembled slightly, moving not forward or backward, but sideways. Sideways meant the demon was still inside him. He whispered, "It clings to you." The merchant's eyes flicked toward him, but they didn't look like human eyes anymore. Something watched from behind them, something steady, something patient. The Asipu could feel it studying him. He retrieved the barley and placed it beneath the man's head. He set the copper piece gently on the man's chest, the feather he held in his right hand, lifting it slowly as he recited the diagnosis incantation.
"From the clay of the earth I summon the truth. From the water of the river I reveal your shadow. By the signs written in the moon, by the ripples in the bowl, by the trembling of breath, I name you." The room grew colder. "Left-hand demon, wanderer of crooked paths, you are seen." A sudden gust of wind extinguished the lamp. The Asipu did not move. In the darkness, he heard a whisper, not from the merchant, but from somewhere near the door. The same whisper the girl had described days earlier. "I am here." The Asipu's heartbeat slowed, not from fear, but from focus. The diagnosis was complete. The demon was confirmed. The ritual of expulsion would come next. But for now, he quietly pressed the copper piece deeper into the merchant's clothing, an anchor to trap the demon. He stepped back and whispered to the family, "Prepare your hearts. Tomorrow night we cast him out." He left the house slowly, closing the door firmly behind him. As he walked back toward his home, he looked up at the moon again. The left side had shrunk even more. A warning, a countdown. The demon had shown its signs. Now the Asipu would show his. And tomorrow, when the ritual began, only one of them would walk back into the night. Night fell over Nippur like a silent curtain, and the Asipu sat alone in his quarters, staring into the flickering flame of a small oil lamp. The flame swayed gently, bending left, then right, as if pulled by invisible currents, but there was no wind. The air was still. The silence, however, was not.
He could feel them. They were coming. Not physically, not in bodies or shadows, but in the way a hunter feels the presence of predator before seeing it. A pressure blooming in the chest, a faint prickle at the back of the neck, a feeling like something ancient has opened its eyes again. The seven. He whispered their name in his mind, not daring to speak it aloud. Even the tablets warned against it. The seven evil spirits, the fiercest forces recorded in the exorcist's lore, were not simply demons. They were the calamities of ancient memory. Ancient Sumerian texts described them as storms born before the gods, creatures of chaos older than the order of the world. They were not summoned. They arrived, whenever fear opened a doorway. And fear was spreading quickly across the city. A girl possessed, then a merchant overtaken by a spirit hiding behind the breath. Two cases, linked by signs too precise to ignore. This was no wandering demon. This was the work of something greater, something that moved through shadows, not like a predator, but like an invading tide. The Asipu reached for a small clay tablet resting on the floor beside him. He lifted it gently, as though holding a fragile piece of the past. Its surface was inscribed with cuneiform so old the edges had faded, yet the symbols describing the seven remained sharp, etched with unusual force, as though the scribe himself had carved them in fear. He read the first line silently. "They are seven. Seven in the deep. Seven in the sky. Seven that never relent." He placed the tablet before him and closed his eyes. He had studied these spirits since his apprenticeship. Every Asipu learned their descriptions, recited them, memorized them, feared them. The first spirit was the storm demon, a being whose presence felt like a violent wind ripping through a closed room. He was said to enter through windows left unlatched or cracks between bricks, carrying with him fever and trembling. The second was the lurker of dust, a creature of suffocation and dryness, slipping into lungs unnoticed until the breath turned heavy. The Asipu murmured softly as he recalled each one. The third spirit crawled on the edges of dreams, sliding beneath mats, curling in the corners of sleep, tormenting victims with visions of endless desert. The fourth moved with a serpent's precision, entering through the ear, whispering doubt, twisting thoughts until they spiraled into madness. The fifth was a shadow that stretched longer than a human body, even at noon. It was the spirit of chills, of sudden cold, of bodies drained of warmth. The sixth was the skin feaster, a demon that caused boils, blisters, strange marks on the flesh as if suckled by unseen mouths. But it was the seventh spirit the Asipu feared most. The tablet called it the Old Hunger. Some described it as a faceless presence that walked at the edges of lamplight. Others said it was a breath that crawled across the floor like a living fog. It could not be summoned, nor banished easily. It came when fear swelled. It stayed where weakness rooted. It clung to those who felt hopeless. The Asipu exhaled slowly. And for the first time in many years, he felt something stir inside him. Not dread, recognition. Because the signs he'd witnessed these past nights, the whispers behind doors, the dreams, the coldness in limbs, the shifting shadows, did not match just one spirit. They matched several. This was not a single demon. It was a gathering, a preparation. The Asipu stood abruptly, his knees stiff, his breath sharp. He paced the small room, running his fingers along the walls as though searching for cracks. The seven did not haunt homes casually. They appeared when something deeper stirred, when the world felt off balance. He moved to the shelf where he kept the ritual items, copper chunks, dried reeds, small jars of oil, amulets etched with lion-headed symbols, but none of these comforted him. Against a simple demon, yes, they were enough. Against something like the burning whisperer, with enough preparation, they held power. But against the seven, clay charms were as useless as dust. He picked up the oldest tablet again and read the inscription that always made his skin tighten. They were born in the time before order, before kings, before temples, when the world was a sea of shadows. They walk the earth again, whenever fear invites them.
He whispered, "Fear invites them." He said it again, softer. "Fear invites." Then his voice froze. A realization struck him. The girl's family had lived in fear for 2 nights. The merchant's family had suffered silently, believing something wicked approached their dreams. Word of these events had spread quickly through streets and markets. Mothers clutched children, men walked home before sunset. Doors were barred earlier each night. Lamps were lit in every corner of the house. Fear had saturated the city. And where fear spread, the seven followed like smoke chasing fire. His heart tightened as he recalled something else, something almost forgotten. During his training, his master had spoken of a rare phenomenon, a threshold night. A night when fear, rituals, dreams, and omens aligned to create a perfect opening for the seven. The Asipu whispered, "Is that what this is?" His lamp flickered violently. The flame bent, twisted, and then shot upward as though grasped by invisible hands. He steadied himself. Outside, a dog howled. Another barked in reply. Then silence. The Asipu grabbed his staff and left the room in long, determined strides. He walked through the dark alleys, following the sound of the howls until he reached the edge of the city, where the homes thinned and the fields stretched beyond. The night was cold, colder than it should have been. The Asipu's breath rose in pale clouds. He stopped walking. Ahead of him, across the dirt path, lay a thin line of dust that seemed to shimmer faintly. He knelt and touched it. The dust was unnaturally dry, drier than the surrounding earth, as if all the moisture had been pulled from it. The lurker of dust. A sign. He swallowed and stood again. The wind shifted behind him. A sudden gust, cold, sharp, biting, struck the back of his neck. When he turned, he saw nothing. But he knew. The storm demon. 2 signs. 2 spirits.
He closed his eyes and let the sensations wash over him, feeling for the other 5. He felt a faint vibration underfoot, the tremor of something crawling on the edges of reality. He heard a soft hiss, like a snake exhaling. He saw, just for a moment, a long shadow stretching at his feet, even though he stood still.
The 7 were not fully here, but they were watching, judging, waiting. The Asipu whispered, "Not yet, but soon." He felt something shift, an invisible gaze settling on him with quiet hunger, as if the spirits recognized him, as if they remembered the one who had shattered the burning whisperer's vessel. And just as he opened his eyes, he saw something move, a blur, a flicker, a shadow that darted behind a distant tree. When he approached cautiously, he saw a mound of disturbed dirt at its base. The earth had cracked open slightly. A small clay figurine lay half buried beneath it. His breath caught. It was identical to the one he had used during his ritual with the girl. But he had shattered that one. This could only mean one thing. Someone had dug it up, or something had restored it. The 7 were gathering strength, pulling remnants of fear and ritual energy together to open a path that led directly into the city. He reached down to pick up the figurine, but the moment his fingers touched it, the ground vibrated softly. A warning. A pulse. A presence. He snatched his hand back. The figurine vibrated a final time and then cracked down the center. A sign of awakening. A message. The Asipu whispered, "You challenge me." The wind answered by swirling dust around his feet, so cold it burned. He returned home as the first red hint of dawn spread across the sky. He knew sleep would not come. His mind raced, replaying ancient teachings, warnings etched into tablets, whispered lessons from old masters whose bones were long gone. The 7 had not come fully into the world yet, but they were assembling. And once the 7 walked together, even the gods struggled to restrain them. The Asipu sat before his tablets once more, breath steadying slowly. He had 1 night, perhaps 2, to prepare. The merchant's ritual would be dangerous, more dangerous than any he had performed before, because he wasn't fighting 1 demon. He was fighting 7 ancient forces hungry for fear. 7 that devoured the weak but hungered for the brave. 7 that entered cities like smoke, leaving only silence behind. And the city of Nippur had just invited them. The night of the ritual arrived like a held breath. The sky, normally bright with stars over Nippur, was masked by a thin metallic haze that clung to the air and caught the moonlight like a bruise. People walked fast on the streets, heads covered, voices hushed. They felt something heavy in the atmosphere, an invisible pressure rolling low and slow over the rooftops, like thunder with no storm. Dogs refused to leave doorways. Donkeys paced without reason. Infants cried without waking. Fear had thickened the air. Fear invited the 7. Inside his small chamber, the Asipu prepared for the Šurpu, the ancient ritual of burning, a cleansing ceremony older than the cities themselves. The word meant to burn, but it was never as simple as fire. It was a controlled destruction of objects tied to the demon's presence, a symbolic annihilation of its hold, a ritual designed to unmake the pathways through which an evil spirit traveled. The Asipu had performed Šurpu before, but only for minor demons, jealous ghosts, wandering shadows, fevers that clung like cobwebs. This time was different. Tonight he was not confronting a small curse. He was confronting a presence strengthened by fear, by whispers, by the gathering of forces that watched the city's edge.
He tied a strip of linen around his head to steady his concentration, then knelt before the items laid out before him on a woven reed mat. The blackened copper shard for capturing whispers, the barley grains for absorbing spiritual residue, 7 tiny clay figurines, one for each of the 7 evil spirits, a bowl of pure water, a bundle of dried reeds for the fire, and a tablet inscribed with the ritual words. He touched each object, murmuring softly, as though calming them. The Asipu knew that in this world, objects were not lifeless vessels. They were bridges, tools, weapons, witnesses. Each one would play a part in tonight's fight. He rose slowly, gathering the tools into a cloth bag. Before stepping out, he extinguished his oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Darkness was not a comfort tonight, but it was honest. It showed the world as the demons saw it. Outside, the streets were nearly empty. The Asipu walked with a steady pace toward the merchant's house, the linen bag pressing against his hip with each step. A faint wind stirred, and he felt the cold touch of the lurker of dust brushing his neck. A whisper rode the air, the kind that slipped into the ear like a spider crawling along skin.
He ignored it. Fear was a doorway. He would not open it. When he reached the merchant's home, the door was shut tight, barred with 2 wooden beams and covered in chalk circles drawn by desperate hands. The merchant's wife opened the door only a crack, enough to let the Asipu inside before sealing it again, as though darkness itself were trying to enter. The merchant lay stretched out on a mat, eyes half open, breathing shallow. His limbs twitched with every sharp breath, moving as though pulled by invisible strings. A bowl of spilled water lay near his head, dampening the floor. A copper charm rested on his chest, trembling gently as if touched by something unseen. The Asipu knelt beside him. "You must not touch him," he told the family. "What clings to him tonight will cling to anyone who shows fear." The wife withdrew instantly. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her hands trembled even when clasped tightly together. The Asipu placed a hand on the merchant's forehead. The coldness was worse than before. Not natural cold, not fevered chills. It was the cold of a place that had never known sunlight. The merchant's lips parted, and a faint voice escaped, not his own. "He watches. He stands at the door." The Asipu's jaw tightened. The left-hand demon was here. He opened his bag and removed the 7 clay figurines, arranging them in a semicircle around the merchant's head. Each figurine represented one of the 7 evil spirits. In a lesser exorcism, he would use only one figurine, representing the specific demon identified. But tonight, he could not risk misjudgment. If even one of the 7 lingered unseen, the ritual would fail. He placed barley beneath the merchant's tongue, a symbolic act meant to distract the demon, to draw it toward the grain. Then he took the copper shard and set it gently on the merchant's chest. Copper trapped whispers. Copper caught lies. Copper sealed spiritual breath. Then he lit the bundle of reeds. Flame flared upward, casting sharp shadows across the room. The light trembled as though something resisted it, as though the darkness itself pushed back. The Asipu raised the flame toward each figurine, passing it slowly over their heads. Their shadows warped grotesquely on the wall, twist in shapes that did not match their forms. The merchant's body arched violently. A long, low wail escaped him, too deep for a human throat. His limbs jerked as though gripped by several hands at once. The Asipu did not look away. He recited the first lines of the Šurpu tablet, his voice rhythmic, deep, unwavering. "Let the fire consume the path of darkness.
Let the flame devour the shadow. May the curse be undone as the grain burns and the whisper falls silent. The flame crackled louder. Embers flickered onto the floor. The air grew thick with heat, yet the room felt colder. The merchant's eyes rolled back. His lips moved, forming words that hissed like steam escaping from under a lid. They were not human words. They belonged to the deep desert, to the nights when the world was still young and the gods had not yet tamed it. The wife cried softly in the corner. The Asipu lifted his staff and tapped the ground 3 times, each tap sending a dull vibration through the clay floor, each vibration calling the demon's attention. "Turn to me," he commanded. The merchant's head snapped toward him with unnatural quickness. The Asipu continued, "You who cling to breath, you who twist the tongue, you who fear the flame, come forth." A screech, not heard with ears but felt in the bones, rippled through the room. The flame dimmed, the shadows lengthened. The 7 were listening. The Asipu dipped his fingers into the bowl of water, then flicked droplets over the merchant's body. Each droplet struck with a faint hiss, as though hitting hot stone. He began the burning. He took the first figurine, the storm demon, and held it above the flame until the clay heated and cracked. A thin line split down its center, and a sudden burst of cold wind rushed through the room, extinguishing the flame for a single heartbeat before it reignited with twice the brightness. The Asipu felt the resistance. He felt the spirit recoil. He lifted the second figurine, Dust Lurker, and pressed it into the flame. The clay glowed red, then shattered with a soft pop. A cloud of dry, suffocating air filled the room, forcing the family to cover their faces. He continued. Figurine 3 cracked. Figurine 4 split. Figurine 5 exploded with a burst of ice-cold air. Figurine 6 trembled until it fell apart in his hands. The room pulsed with pressure, the invisible presence growing weaker with every shattering form. Then he reached for the 7th figurine, the one representing the old hunger. This figurine was darker than the rest, made of clay mixed with ash. As he lifted it, the merchant's body convulsed violently. His mouth opened wide, but instead of a scream, a long exhale escaped, cold, moist, like the breath of something buried deep underground. The Asipu brought the figurine close to the flame. The flame bent away from it.
As if afraid, he forced it closer. The room darkened. Shadows crawled up the walls like vines. The merchant's voice erupted in a chorus of layered tones, male, female, child, ancient, overlapping into a single word. No. The Asipu grit his teeth. He thrust the figurine directly into the heart of the flame. It cracked instantly, splintering into 7 pieces. A scream ripped through the room, silent yet deafening, vibrating through bones, through walls, through air. Then, silence. The flame steadied. The shadows shrank. The cold retreated. The merchant collapsed, gasping, his breath returning shakily. The copper charm on his chest stopped trembling. The Asipu exhaled. The ritual was complete. But as he stood, he felt something, a faint stirring, a whisper,
that drifted across the room like smoke from an extinguished fire. Not a threat, not a voice, a promise. "We will return." And the Asipu understood. Burning away the curse was not the end. It was only a delay. Because fire could drive away spirits, but it could not erase the paths they walked.
The first time they let him into the inner room, Naram thought his heart might break from beating too hard. For months he had swept the temple courtyard, fetched water from the river, carried bundles of reeds, polished clay tablets until his fingers shriveled and cracked. He had listened to the low voices of the learned men on the other side of the wall, the Asu and the Asipu, speaking in the measured rhythms of knowledge. He had tried, again and again, to catch words through the cracks, a demon's name, a ritual phrase, a warning. But stone does not gossip easily. He had been nothing more than a boy with quick hands and wide eyes, a shadow in the background, a pair of bare feet running errands for others, until tonight. "Come," his master said. Just that one word, spoken softly, as the last light of evening slipped off the ziggurat and the city prepared to fold itself into darkness. Naram looked up from the floor he was sweeping. The Asipu stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, his face calmer than the night sky, his eyes as unreadable as clay tablets baked hard by the sun. "Come," he repeated, and turned away without checking to see if the boy followed. Naram's broom slipped from his grasp. His mouth had gone dry. For a heartbeat, his legs wouldn't move. Then something inside him unlocked, and he hurried forward, dust clinging to his ankles, his pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. He crossed the threshold of the inner room and felt it immediately. The air was different here, heavy with incense, dense with thought. The walls were lined with shelves sagging under the weight of tablets, each pressed with symbols that contained entire worlds. There was no chatter, no temple noise, just the soft crackle of an oil lamp, the rustle of linen, the quiet presence of old secrets. The Asipu did not turn to look at him right away. Instead, he adjusted the flame of the lamp, then knelt before a low table where a fresh slab of wet clay awaited the stylus. "You have been watching," the master said after a long silence. His voice was gentle, but Naram felt it press on him like a hand on his shoulder. "Do not deny it." Naram swallowed. "Yes, master." "You listen at cracks. You lean near walls. You pretend to sweep slowly when you hear my name." Heat rushed to Naram's face. His hands curled into fists at his sides, nails digging into his palms. He stopped. Lies would be useless here. The Asipu saw lies as easily as smoke in sunlight. "I want to learn," Naram said instead. His voice shook, but the words came from the deepest part of him. "More than sweeping, more than hauling water. I want to understand what you do. I want to know how to," he searched for the word, "how to protect."
The Asipu finally turned. He was not a frightening man to look at. His hair, streaked with gray, fell to his shoulders. His robe was simple, its only ornament a narrow band of stitched symbols near the hem. His face bore lines carved by years of watching others suffer. His eyes, though, held a weight that unnerved even grown men. He studied Naram for a long moment, as if reading a tablet. "You are young," the Asipu said. "You do not know what you are asking." Naram's heart stumbled. "I am almost a man." "Almost is nothing," his master replied. "Demons do not care about almost. They feast on it." He regarded the boy a moment longer, then sighed quietly. "But you have not run from what you've seen." I haven't seen anything, only the people afterward, the ones you helped, the women who stopped crying.
The men who breathe again. The way they look at you when you leave. Like, he searched for a word and found only an image. Like you took a stone from their chest. The corners of the Asipu's mouth twitched, not quite into a smile. That stone, he said quietly, slides into mine every time. He rose, joints creaking faintly, and gestured to the shelves. You wish to learn, then first you will learn to see. He picked up a tablet and placed it in Niram's hands. It was heavier than the boy expected, and colder. The surface was pressed with tight rows of cuneiform characters, so small he had to squint in the lamplight. He could read, at least well enough to copy lists and simple prayers, but this was like looking at an entire storm captured in clay. Read, the Asipu said. Niram's mouth went dry again. Aloud. Always aloud. He swallowed, shifted his grip, and began to sound out the symbols. His tongue stumbled over archaic phrasing, over words used only in ritual speech. It was a description of a sickness. The way it began with a burning in the head, moved down into the chest, turned breath into fire, eyes into lanterns. It described the dreams that followed, visions of rivers that ran upward, of doors that bled dust, of shadows carrying bowls of blood. At the bottom, the text named the cause. Spirit of fever-born wind, Niram read, his voice barely above a whisper, who enters through the nose and clings to the heart.
He shivered. He had heard people describe sickness before, but never like this, never as something with intention, a will, a hunger. This is one diagnosis, the Asipu said. One pattern recorded by a man who died before your grandfather's grandfather was born. There are hundreds. He pointed to the shelves. You will begin by learning them, not just the words, the feeling, the pattern in your blood as you speak them. Each diagnosis is a path. To walk in the dark, you must know where the stones are. Niram's fingers tightened on the tablet. Excitement warred with unease in his chest. And the demons? Will you teach me their names? The Asipu's gaze hardened. Some, not all. A name is not a toy. It is a leash and a doorway. When you speak their names, they hear you. Some answer, some only watch. You are not yet ready to be watched. Niram bit down on his impatience, nodding. He did not want to seem childish. Children were sent back to courtyards. Apprentices were invited inside. But that night, after the Asipu dismissed him with instructions to memorize the first tablet by morning, Niram lay awake on his mat, staring at the ceiling. His lips moved silently, reciting the lines again and again until they blurred into rhythm. Yet his mind wandered, restless, to the room beyond, to the shelves he had only glimpsed. To the tablet his master never let anyone touch. He had seen it once, when the door had been left slightly open. It was darker than the others, its clay mixed with ash, its edges bound with a strip of old leather. The Asipu had been holding it with both hands, his eyes closed, his lips moving silently. When he sensed Niram watching, he had turned with a swiftness that surprised the boy and blown out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. That one, he had said, later, without explanation, is not for you. Which meant, of course, that Niram thought of little else. Days stretched into weeks. His world rearranged itself around the tablets. By day, he fetched water, swept floors, and ran errands. By night, he sat in the lamplight of the inner chamber, sounding out diagnoses, omens, ritual instructions. He read of the way smoke rose from incense when a demon was near, of the way a dog's bark could indicate which direction a curse had come from, of how the moon's shape could foretell whether a sickness would turn the victim's blood against their own heart.
The more he learned, the more he understood how fragile everything was. Illness was not simply unfortunate. It was a message, a trespass, a warning. The Asipu taught him to watch.
They would stand together at the edge of the market, the master silent, the apprentice restless. "What do you see?" the Asipu would ask. "Merchants," Naram would answer. "Buying, selling, a woman arguing over the price of oil, children stealing dates." He would shrug. "Normal things." "Look deeper," his master would say. "Whose shadow moves too quickly? Who avoids the sun? Whose eyes do not match their laughter?" At first, Naram saw nothing unusual, but gradually, under his master's guidance, patterns emerged. The man whose left hand never moved, the woman who flinched whenever the temple bell rang, the child who did not speak, not because she could not, but because something inside her refused. Demons love what is hidden: shame, secrets, quiet anger. They sit in the corners of the heart and tug gently, gently, until the whole person tilts toward them without realizing. One evening, as they watched the crowd thin beneath a bruised purple sky, a man stumbled past them. His clothes were fine, but rumpled. Sweat darkened his collar. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, darting like a trapped animal's. Naram frowned. "He looks frightened." "He is," the Asipu said softly, "but not of us." The man stopped at a stall, picked up a clay cup, then set it down so hard it cracked. He muttered an apology and hurried away, clutching something under his robe. For a brief second, when the cloth shifted, Naram saw it, a small image carved from bone, hanging on a cord. Not of any known god. "Is that—" he began. "A charm," the Asipu said, "but not one made by a healer." "Then who?" His master's jaw tightened. "There are others who meddle in the dark, those who bargain instead of banish, who call spirits not to protect a life, but to improve it." He turned away from the market. His shadow shadowed. "Never forget this, Naram. There is a difference between entering a lion's den to free a child and entering to steal the lion's teeth." Naram shivered. Yet curiosity flickered beneath his fear. Later that week, the first test came. A woman arrived at the temple at dusk, carrying a bundle in her arms. At first, Naram thought it was a wrapped piece of cloth, perhaps a broken idol or a sick animal. Then the bundle moved and began to cry. It was a baby. The mother's face was streaked with tears. Her lips trembled as she spoke to the Asipu. "He will not sleep, not for more than a few breaths. He screams, like this, like someone is hurting him, and his eyes—" She looked down, voice cracking. "When he cries, he looks at the door, always the door." The Asipu glanced at Naram. "What do you hear?"
Naram swallowed, stepping closer. The baby's wails were high and ragged, but there was something odd in the rhythm, something too measured, too insistent, as if the cry itself were a pattern being scratched into the air. "The door," he murmured, remembering. "He looks at the door." "Yes," the Asipu said, "demons love thresholds." He led them into a small side room, dark and cool, and motioned for the mother to lay the baby on a mat near the doorway. "Stand aside," he said gently. "Let us see who comes to look at him." Naram watched, heart pounding. At first, nothing happened. The baby cried, small fists clenched, legs kicking weakly. The air felt thick, stale. The Asipu lit a stick of incense and placed it just inside the doorway. The smoke rose straight up for a moment, then bent, not toward an open window, not toward the baby, but toward the crack between the door and the floor.
The boy felt the skin along his arms tighten. "The smoke moves sideways," he whispered. "Good," the Asipu said. "You see." He stepped closer to the door, his eyes narrowing. "There is something there. Not strong, not old, but hungry." "A demon?" Naram whispered. "A little one," his master replied, "like a jackal at the edge of a campfire. It has found a crack and is sniffing." He reached into his robe, withdrew a small clay amulet etched with the image of a lion-headed figure. "We will not waste a ritual on this." Naram watched as the Asipu hung the amulet on a small peg near the door, then scattered a line of millet along the threshold. "Why millet?" the boy asked. "Demons are like men, easily distracted. Make the new path more tempting than the old, and they wander away." He murmured a brief incantation under his breath, then turned to the mother. "Tonight, sleep with your son away from this door. In the morning, sweep the millet out into the street. Do not look to see what pattern it has made." The woman nodded, clutching her baby tightly, her eyes still shiny with fear, but now holding a fragile thread of hope. When she had gone, Naram turned to his master. "You made it sound so simple." "It was simple," the Asipu replied. "Not every shadow is a storm, not every cry needs fire." "But what if you were wrong?" "Then we would know," he said, and his eyes grew distant. "The hard way." Naram did not sleep well that night. His dreams were crowded with thresholds, doors in corridors that never ended, all slightly open, all breathing. When he woke, the darkness in his small room felt thicker than usual. He lit his lamp and tried to steady his breathing. The next evening, the woman returned. Her eyes were brighter, the baby snuffled softly against her shoulder, asleep.
"He slept," she said, almost disbelieving, "like a stone in the river. No screaming, no staring at the door." "Good," the Asipu said. "Then it was only a jackal." Naram's heart surged with pride. His master's work had prevented something terrible before it grew. He wanted to ask more questions, to probe every detail, to know exactly how the Asipu had recognized the threat's size. But before he could speak, the older man turned to him with an expression he seldom wore, something like concern. "You learned something today," he said quietly. "What?" That it is not always a battle," Naram replied. "Sometimes it is only a nudge." The Asipu nodded. "Yes. Remember that when your blood is hungry for power. Not every illness is an invitation to show your strength. Sometimes subtlety is what keeps you alive." It was then that Naram made his mistake. Not that day, not the next, but soon after. On a night when the temple was quiet, his master away assisting at a distant house, and the air felt awkwardly empty without the gravity of his presence. Naram was alone in the inner chamber, copying a simple tablet about herbs. The work was dull. His mind wandered. His tongue moved silently, repeating the phrases he longed to use instead, ones about demons in the walls, spirits in the wind, curses woven into breath. His eyes drifted sometimes to the shelves, to the place where the forbidden tablet rested, wrapped in leather. "That one is not for you," his master had said. Naram stared at it. He thought of the market man with the bone charm, of the baby crying at the door, of the girl he had heard about earlier, the one who had seen something standing in her doorway and could no longer sleep. He thought of all the people who walked in fear, while he, Naram, sat in a room copying herb lists.
He rose slowly, the reed stylus slipping from his fingers. The room felt suddenly different. The lamplight seemed too bright, the shadows too deep. Sweat gathered at the back of his neck. "Just to look," he whispered to himself, "just to see." He stepped to the shelf and reached for the tablet.
The leather was rough beneath his fingertips, stiff with age. It crackled softly as he unwrapped it, the sound impossibly loud in the small room. For a moment he hesitated, heart pounding. But curiosity, sharp, bright, and reckless, pushed him on. The tablet beneath was darker than the others, as he remembered, its clay mingled with something like soot. The symbols were etched more deeply, each wedge mark sharp as a blade. He lifted it carefully and carried it to the lamp lead, hands trembling, breath shallow. He did not mean to speak, he meant only to read with his eyes. But the words rose like smoke from the clay, catching on his tongue. Incantation against the gathering of 7, whose names are sealed in the dark. His voice was quiet, but in that room it sounded enormous. The lamp flickered. A faint gust brushed the back of his neck, though no door had opened. Naram swallowed. He should stop. He did not. He read the next line, then the one after, his voice soft but steady, body leaning closer to the tablet as though drawn. Spirits born before the foundations, you who walk in the dust between breaths, I call your attention. The lamp went out. Darkness swallowed him whole. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something listening. The kind of thick quiet that makes sound seem like an offense. Naram froze. His breath sounded too loud in his own ears. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt rather than saw a presence shift in the room, 1, then 2, then more. Not visible, not formed, but pressing, the way a crowd presses against the walls of a narrow alley.
A whisper moved through the darkness, not in any language he knew, but somehow he understood. "We hear you." Naram's throat closed. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the tablet. Somewhere, beyond the walls, the temple bell gave a distant, echoing tone. The sound wrapped around his fear like a rope. He sucked in a breath and did the only thing he could think of. He reversed the words. His master had once mentioned, almost casually, that if an incantation was misbegun, sometimes reversing its phrases could seal what had been cracked. Naram stammered through the lines backward, his tongue fumbling, his teeth chattering as the taste of clay and smoke filled his mouth. The presence in the room tightened, then, slowly, loosened. A sudden pop broke the silence. The lamp reignited. It should have been impossible. Oil lamps don't relight themselves. But the wick smoldered back to life, the flame trembling violently for a moment before settling. Naram stood there, panting, his whole body shaking. Then the door opened. The Asipu stepped inside, the night air clinging to his robe. His eyes swept the room in a single, terrifyingly precise glance. The unwrapped tablet, the boy's trembling hands, the wild look in his eyes, the lamp freshly aflame, though no new oil had been poured. For a long moment, he said nothing. "You opened it," he said at last, his voice very quiet. I didn't mean—" Naram's words tangled. "I just wanted to see. I didn't think it would—" "Call them," the Asipu finished. Naram's knees threatened to give out.
His master walked across the room unhurried and gently took the tablet from his hands. He wrapped it in leather again, fingers precise, expression unreadable. Then he turned back to the boy. "You felt them," he said, not a question. "Yes," Naram whispered. "How many?" The boy's mind flashed back to that suffocating moment, the sense of multiple presences arrayed around him like teeth. 7, he breathed. It felt like 7. The Asipu closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, there was no anger there, only sorrow. "You have taken your first step. Not the way I would have chosen, not when you were ready, but it is done now." "I'm sorry," Naram said. "I was foolish." "Yes," his master agreed. "You were. But so was I, once." Naram stared at him. "You?"
The Asipu looked down at his hands, turning them palm up, as if searching for old burns. "Power is a sweet smoke," he said. "It clings to the heart. You smell it once, and you never forget. When I was your age, I opened words I was not meant to know. I, too, felt eyes gather in the dark." He stepped closer, resting a hand briefly on Naram's shoulder. "Listen to me. This path is not a game, not a puzzle to solve, not a ladder you climb to feel tall. It is a narrow bridge over a pit that has no bottom. Do you still wish to walk it?" Naram's throat ached. He thought of the baby at the door, of the merchant on his mat, of the girl who couldn't sleep, of his own terror standing in the darkness with invisible things listening. He could run. He could go back to sweeping temples and carrying water and growing old as a man who once touched the edge of something terrible and walked away. Or he lifted his chin. "Yes," he whispered, "I do." The Asipu searched his face for a long time. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded once. "Then you will learn. Properly. No more cracks, no more stolen words." He turned back to the shelf, sliding the forbidden tablet into the deepest shadow. "When the time comes," he added, "you will read that one again, but not alone, and not in this room." Naram exhaled shakily, his body still buzzing with the echo of those silent voices. He did not yet understand that the time his master spoke of was not years away. It was coming faster than any of them realized. Because the 7 had heard him, and once they hear a name, they never truly forget it. The morning after Naram's forbidden reading, the city of Nippur woke uneasy. The sunlight was thin, as though the sky itself had not slept. Market vendors opened their stalls slower than usual, glancing over their shoulders at nothing. Women fetching water from the canal muttered that the river felt colder. Men walking to work rubbed their arms as if trying to chase away a chill that clung beneath their skin. Rumors moved softly at first, then quickly, then like wind. There had been a shadow on the eastern road at midnight, one that stretched longer than any man. A strange knocking at the door of a potter's house, though no one stood there when he opened it. A child waking with a scream that echoed through the courtyard even after she stopped breathing.
By midday, the city's fear was simmering, and simmering fear, the Asipu knew, was the perfect soil for demons. But while the Asipu prepared for the storms ahead, another group of healers felt something different rising, a kind of resentment thickening in the air like clay. The Asu, the practical physicians of Mesopotamia, were becoming restless. For years, the balance between the Asu and the Asipu had been delicate. One healed the body, the other healed the unseen. One was respected, the other was feared. Their roles interlocked uneasily, but they coexisted out of necessity. Yet recently, the balance had been shifting. People talked more about demons than diseases, more about omens than herbs, more about possession than infection. And the Asu saw their influence slipping away. It began subtly. A mother whose child had fever would bypass the Asu entirely, going straight to the priests. A farmer with a broken leg insisted the break was a curse from a rival and refused splints until a ritual was performed. Even a wealthy merchant had died recently after refusing herbal medicine, claiming his sickness could only be driven out by incantation. The Asu watched these events with growing frustration. None felt it more than Idin Sin, the most skilled physician in Nippur. Idin Sin was a man shaped by logic and earth rather than fear of the unseen. His hands were steady, his voice calm, his mind sharp. He brewed medicines the way a potter shapes clay, carefully, deliberately, with faith in the tangible world. He believed illness could be understood, not feared, treated, not banished. He also believed the Asipu had grown too bold. So when Idin Sin heard that the merchant the Asipu had treated was still lying weak and trembling in his home, the physician's patience snapped. He marched through the city's dusty streets toward the merchant's courtyard, his sandals slapping the ground with purpose. People parted for him. The Asu still held a certain authority, though one now chipped and fading. Naram happened to be outside, carrying a jar of water back toward the temple. He recognized the physician immediately. The sharp jawline, the stern gaze, the air of someone who despised nonsense. Naram stepped aside, bowing his head politely. Idin Sin barely acknowledged him. To him, temple apprentices were half-trained shadows.
He made his way into the merchant's house without knocking. Inside, the air was dim and stuffy. The merchant lay weakly on his mat, his wife dabbing his forehead with a cloth. A faint smell of burned reeds lingered, the remnants of the Šurpu ritual. Idin Sin froze, nostrils flaring. "You burned something in here," he said sharply. The wife straightened. "It was the Asipu. He said the demon—" "Demon," Idin Sin muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes. "Of course." He knelt beside the merchant, pressing fingers to the man's pulse. Slow but steady. His skin was cool, no fever. His breathing light but normal. The tremors occasional. "This is recovery, not possession." The wife hesitated. "But he said—" "I don't care what he said," the physician snapped. "You brought your husband to me last month for back pain. Did I shout of demons? No, I treated him, and he walked home the same day." The woman shrank back. Idin Sin rose. "These rituals frighten people into believing they are sicker than they are. They exhaust the mind, they weaken the spirit, they create illness where none existed." He turned toward the door and found the Asipu standing there. Cloaked in darkness from the courtyard behind him, the Asipu's expression was unreadable. His posture straight, his gaze unwavering. "Physician," he said quietly, as if the word itself were a greeting. "Priest," Idin Sin replied, but with no warmth, only tension, only challenge. For a long moment the room held its breath. Naram approached from outside, carrying the water jar carefully. He knew better to interrupt. Even as an apprentice, he sensed what was unfolding, something larger than a disagreement, something old and brittle beginning to crack. Idin Sin gestured toward the merchant. "He needs rest and food, nothing more."
You convinced this family they were tormented by a spirit. Your theatrics nearly frightened them into madness." The Asipu stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "My theatrics freed him. A sickness of the spirit requires cleansing." "There was no spirit," Idinsin shouted. "It was a night fever, nothing more." "You diagnose fevers. I diagnose the unseen." "Unseen nonsense. Unseen does not mean unreal."
"Unreal does not mean magical," Idinsin countered, voice rising. "Do you know how many people have died this year because they sought rituals instead of remedies? How many children you terrify by telling them shadows have claws? How many husbands refuse medicine because you claim a demon sits in their breath?" The Asipu's jaw tightened. "I do not invent demons," he said softly. "I remove them." "By burning barley and breaking clay toys?" Idinsin scoffed. "Or by whispering over a patient until they believe your stories? You are not a healer, you are a storyteller." Naram's breath caught. The Asipu stepped closer, his voice lowering into something sharp and dangerous. "And you," he said to the physician, "are blind to anything you cannot touch. That is your flaw, and it will endanger this city." Idinsin's mouth curled. "The city is endangered by ignorance, by fear-mongering, by rituals that have no place in a rational world. Fear exists because danger exists, and danger walks these streets tonight whether you acknowledge it or not. Because you tell them so," Idinsin hissed. "You priests live off fear. Without it, what are you?" The room fell to silence, a heavy silence. The Asipu's eyes hardened, not with anger, but with something deeper, something sorrowful. "You think I want this?" he whispered. "You think I want to stand between shadows and the living? You think I enjoy speaking names that make the walls shudder? You think I seek power?" He pointed to the merchant. "I do this because if I don't, others die." But Idinsin shook his head. "And if I don't, others die." The two men stood facing one another like two halves of a broken world, one built from logic, one built from myth. One lifting the body, the other guarding the soul. One holding herbs, the other holding incantations. And between them, like a thin line of fraying thread, stood the people, unsure whom to trust. Naram looked from one to the other, feeling a strange weight in his chest. He admired both men. Each believed deeply in his path. Each saw truth through different windows of the same dark room.
Suddenly, the merchant stirred with a low groan. Both healers turned toward him instinctively. Idinsin knelt first, checking his pulse again. The Asipu watched, silent, waiting. Naram saw something flicker in the merchant's expression, something frightened, but it passed quickly. The merchant's breath steadied. "He is improving," Idinsin said triumphantly. "Let the man rest. Let his wife feed him. Let him be human again, instead of a battleground for invisible spirits." The Asipu looked down at the merchant, then at the copper amulet still resting on his chest. His eyes narrowed slightly. "It is not over," he murmured. "When the wind changes, you will understand." But Idinsin was already walking out. "Wind," he scoffed. "I treat sickness. You chase shadows." As the physician left, the door closing sharply behind him, Naram felt the tension in the room thicken like oil. The Asipu exhaled slowly, then said something Naram had never heard him say before. "She does not understand the Asu, and he does not understand us." Naram stepped closer. "Can they not work together for the people?" The Asipu shook his head softly. "The world of the body and the world of the spirit do not overlap, except in one place." "What place?"
The Asipu looked at him. In us. The words lingered long after they left the house. As they walked back to the temple, Naram turned them over in his mind. Two healers, two worlds, both convinced they were protecting the city, both certain the other was wrong. But the sky above Nippur that night was darker than usual, and somewhere beyond the walls the seven stirred. They did not care about arguments between priests and physicians. They only cared which world cracked first.
By the time the sun sank behind the ziggurat, the city of Nippur felt like a held exhale. No one could point to one single reason. The day had passed like any other. Merchants haggling in the market, donkeys dragging carts of grain, children chasing each other between clay houses, temple bells chiming at appointed hours. Life went on. But beneath it all, something had changed. People locked their doors earlier. Lamps were lit in corners that had never bothered with light before. Mothers tied amulets more tightly around their children's wrists. Men muttered short blessings under their breath as they passed crossroads. And whenever the wind moved through the streets, they shivered, even if the air was not cold. It was as if the city itself was listening, waiting. The Asipu felt it too. Standing at the top of the temple steps at dusk, he looked over Nippur and saw not rooftops, not streets, but veins, paths, lines of fear threading silently between homes. Tiny glowing pockets of anxiety where whispered stories pooled about the girl with the shadow at her door, the merchant trembling with a demon in his breath, the sudden chill that crept into houses even when the day had been hot. Fear was a language, and tonight it spoke clearly. Naram stood just behind his master, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He felt the tension in the air, but also something else, an odd, electric anticipation. Ever since the night he'd accidentally read from the forbidden tablet, the world had felt nearer. The edges of things were sharper. Shadows seemed to lean. Silence had a texture. He hadn't told his master that sometimes, as he drifted off to sleep, he heard faint voices murmuring just beyond understanding. He didn't dare. "This night is heavy," Naram said softly. "Yes," the Asipu replied. The city breathed shallowly. "Is it them?" the boy asked. "The seven?" "Not fully," his master said, "but their echo. When many fear, their footsteps grow louder." A temple attendant approached them nervously. He said, "There is a man waiting in the outer courtyard. He insists on seeing you. He says the gods have sent him here." "Many say that. Still, we will listen." They descended the steps together and walked into the courtyard where vandals were not allowed, but desperate people sometimes slipped through. A tall, thin man stood by one of the pillars, his back rigid, his hands clenched at his sides, as if his own body was a prison he was trying not to escape from.
Naram recognized him. He was a scribe from the lower district. He'd seen him before, bending over wet clay in the marketplace, recording transactions for traders. A quiet man, forgettable, no one who would normally step into a temple uninvited. "Why have you come?" the Asipu asked gently. The scribe's eyes flicked up. They were bloodshot, rimmed with raw red, as though he had not slept in days. His voice, when it came, shook. "It started with a dream," he said, 3 nights ago." The Asipu's shoulders eased, ever so slightly. Dreams he understood. Dreams were paths demons regularly used. "Tell me." The scribe swallowed. "I was standing in my house. But the door was gone, just a wall of clay. He wrung his hands together. I turned and the window was gone. Then the roof, then the floor. Everything in my house vanished, except for one thing. What? Madam asked before he could stop himself. The scribe's lips trembled. The temple, he whispered, standing where my bed should be. But it was wrong, too tall, breathing. Naram blinked. Breathing? Yes, the man's voice cracked. The bricks swelled as if lungs were inside them. The steps pulsed like veins. He shuddered. And then it opened its mouth. Naram felt a chill creep along his spine. The Asipu's expression did not change, but his eyes narrowed slightly, as though some calculation had begun behind them. "What did it say?" the Asipu asked gently. "That is the worst part," the scribe whispered. "It did not speak, it exhaled. And the wind that came from it carried voices, hundreds of voices, thousands, crying, begging, whispering." He raised shaking hands to his ears. "I woke thinking I had gone deaf. There was a ringing, like metal scraping clay. All day did not stop." "And the next night?" "The same dream," the scribe said. "But this time there were shadows at the base of the temple, moving, climbing, pressing into the walls as if they were trying to get in." "And last night?" The man swallowed, his whole body trembling now. "Last night," he whispered, "the shadows made it inside. I could hear them in the walls, scratching, laughing. I woke screaming. My wife ran from her bed and would not return. She said my voice wasn't my own."
Naram's heart hammered. The description felt too close to the tablets he had read. Not the minor demons, not simple fevers. This was something greater. A gathering. A pressure. The Asipu motioned the scribe to follow. "Come," he said, "into the inner courtyard." They led the man through the secondary gate, past carved stone stelae depicting long-ago kings. The further in they walked, the quieter everything became. Even the city noise seemed to fall away, sucked out of the air like breath. They reached a smaller chamber, where the Asipu did his more dangerous work, a place few ordinary people ever saw. The Asipu gestured to a low stool. The scribe sat, hands clenched on his knees so tightly his knuckles blanched. "Do you hear them now?" the master asked. The scribe hesitated. "Sometimes." He looked up. "Right now?" He listened. Naram listened too, though he knew he did not have his master's attunement. At first, he heard nothing. Only his own breathing, the faint hiss of the lamp. Then, so faintly he thought he imagined it, a sound like fingernails gently dragging across wood. "Do you hear that?" the scribe whispered. "Yes," the Asipu said. Naram swallowed. He heard it too. The Asipu retrieved a shallow clay bowl and filled it with water, placing it in front of the man. "Look into it," he said. "Tell me what you see." The scribe leaned forward, staring at the still surface. His reflection stared back, rippling faintly with his breath. For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, the water shivered. Not from movement in the room, not from the man's breath. It rippled from the center outward, as if something beneath it had brushed too close to the surface. The scribe's face drained of color. "There," he whispered. "Do you see?"
The Asipu only nodded. The water rippled again. This time, a faint, dark blur seemed to move across the reflection of the ceiling. Not an object, not a shape, just an absence, a distortion. Naram's mouth went dry. This was not like the jackal demon at the door, not like the small spirit they gently redirected. This felt like something that had weight, even without form. The Asipu murmured words Naram recognized, diagnostic phrases from the older tablets, calling for whatever spirit was near to reveal its nature through signs.
The bowl began to tremble very slightly. The water formed a small whirlpool, spinning slowly counterclockwise. The Asipu stiffened. "Leftward," he breathed. "Always leftward." Naram remembered the left-hand demon, crooked paths, crooked doors, crooked dreams. But this felt larger than a single demon's presence. This felt like an echo of several, layered. "Master," Naram whispered, "is it them?" The Asipu didn't answer. Instead, he raised his voice slightly and spoke directly to whatever hovered unseen in the room. "You have crept into his dreams," he said, his tone firm but not yet challenging. "This house is under the protection of the gods. The temple is not your playground." The scribe started to tremble more violently. "The temple," he whispered hoarsely. "It was the temple that breathed, not my house." The lamp flame shuddered. The hairs on Naram's arms rose. For a heartbeat, the walls did feel closer, as though the very room inhaled. The Asipu's jaw tightened. "This is not happening inside stone," he said. "It is happening inside him." Demons imitate what the victim fears most. Naram glanced at his master sharply. "Do you truly believe that?" The Asipu's eyes flicked to him, and for the first time there was something like doubt. "I believe," he said slowly, "that fear is the reed they hollow out to live inside." The scribe suddenly stiffened. His eyes rolled back white. Naram lurched forward, but the Asipu raised a hand. "Do not touch him." The man's mouth opened slowly, as if pried by invisible fingers. A sound emerged, not quite words, not quite a moan. It was the sound of wind forced through a narrow gap. Then distinctly, in a voice that seemed layered with others, came a phrase. "We are in the walls." Naram's heart slammed against his ribs. The Asipu stepped closer, voice steady. "Which walls?" "The ones that breathe, the ones that remember names." "What names?" the Asipu asked. There was a long pause.
Then the voice said with unnerving clarity, "Yours." Naram felt an invisible hand close around his throat. The Asipu's expression did not change, but Naram saw his fingers tighten around the wooden staff he carried. "You know my name," he said quietly. "But names alone do not frighten me. You are not the first to whisper it." The voice chuckled weakly. Not the scribe's chuckle. Something older. Then, as if a cord had been cut, the man collapsed forward, gasping. The bowl of water tipped and spilled across the floor in nervous rivulets. Silence. True silence. The scratching sound in the walls stopped. The Asipu knelt beside the man, checking his pulse. "You will not die tonight," he said, But you must not sleep alone. Go home, sit with family, keep the lamps burning. Do not stare at the door if you can avoid it. And if the dream returns, come back immediately." The scribe nodded weakly, tears welling in his eyes, and left the chamber like a man walking on legs that did not belong to him. When the door closed, Naram exhaled shakily. "They said your name," he whispered. "Does that mean—" "It means we are noticed," the Asipu said. "It means what you did in this room with the forbidden tablet has rippled farther than I hoped." He sank onto the low stool, suddenly looking older. "They are not only in the homes now. They are in the spaces between what we believe is safe, in the stories we tell, in the very idea of this temple." Naram looked at the stone around them. For the first time, the walls he had always trusted felt less like protection and more like ribs. "What do they want?" he asked. "Entrance," the Asipu said simply. "Not just into one person's mind, into the city itself, into its memory, its bones." He rose again and gestured for Naram to follow. They climbed narrow stairs to the upper level of the temple where the wind moved more freely and the city spread out below like a sleeping animal. Lamps flickered in houses, tiny dots of light in the dark. From above, Naram noticed something he had never seen before. The city pulsed. Not with sight or sound, but with feeling. Pockets of deep, dense fear glowed in his mind like bruises. At the edges of the streets, near certain crossroads, in homes closest to the outer walls, the air felt thicker. "Can you feel it?" the Asipu asked.
Naram hesitated. "Yes," he whispered, surprised at his own certainty. "Good," his master said. "Not because I wish your senses burdened, but because you will not be blind when this grows worse." He pointed toward 3 areas of the city: the East Road, the Potter's Quarter, the Lower Market. That is where the stories spread the fastest. That is where they will appear most often. We have records." "Records?" Naram asked. The Asipu nodded and led him back down to a deeper chamber within the temple, a place Naram had never entered. The door was sealed by a carved stone slab. It took both of them to push it aside. Inside, the air was cool and dry, smelling faintly of age. Rows of tablets filled the room. These were not the medical recipes or diagnosis lists Naram had grown used to. These tablets were older, rougher, their symbols gouged deep, sometimes frantic, sometimes barely controlled. They were not written in temple calm. They were written in fear. The Asipu picked up one and placed it in Naram's hands. "Read," he said. Naram's voice came thin at first, but grew steadier as he sounded out the words. "In the year of the broken river, when the moon hid its face, and the east wind howled, shadows entered the house of Lugal Nana. They stood at the edges of the room and leaned toward his bed. His wife saw them, his children saw them, the dog saw them and would not move." Naram paused, swallowing. The Asipu was called. He burned barley and clay. He spoke the names. 1 shadow left, but 6 remained. His eyes lifted. 6, he repeated, not 1. "Next," the Asipu said. Naram picked up another tablet, this one smaller, chipped, the cuneiform cramped. "In the month of high water, when the king's army marched,
People heard breathing in the walls of the temple. The bricks sweated. The lamps flickered without wind. A voice spoke from nowhere. "We are in the stones." The priest did not answer. He smashed the lamp and slept without light. The breathing stopped. He drew a shaking breath.
"All of these," the Asipu said quietly, sweeping a hand over the room, "are accounts of nights when the veil thinned, when people did not merely dream but witnessed, when they saw shadows that did not belong to bodies, when temples seemed to inhale, when houses felt like mouths ready to close around those inside." "Why keep these?" Naram whispered. "Why not destroy them?" "Because forgetting is more dangerous than remembering," the Asipu replied. "The seven do not rely only on fear. They rely on ignorance, on each generation believing it is the first to suffer this." He took the first tablet back and traced a line near the bottom. "Here," he said, "read this part." Naram squinted at the worn symbols. "It says the Asipu spoke to the spirit," he read. "And he said, 'You cannot have this house. It knows the names of those who lived before. It will remember those who come after. It is not yours.' And the spirit replied, 'We do not want the house. We want the city.'" Naram looked up, throat tight. "They have always wanted that," the Asipu said. "Not just one life, not one family. They want to sink into the very idea of a place, to become the ghost that every child in that city grows up fearing. That gives them power beyond rituals." Naram stared at the shelves of tablets, feeling the weight of all those recorded nights pressing around him. "And now?" he whispered. "Is it happening again?" The Asipu closed his eyes briefly. "Yes," he said, "on a path that smells very familiar." He set the tablet down. "This is why your reading of the forbidden words was so dangerous. You didn't just speak to them, you reminded them of paths they had walked before." Naram's stomach tightened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know," his master replied, "and your regret is real. But regret cannot unwrite words. It can only change how you speak the next ones." He placed a hand on Naram's shoulder. "Tonight, the temple feels strange, yes, as if it breathes, as if something moves in the walls. People are feeling it. They will talk. Some will come. You must listen, not to comfort yourself, to learn the shape of what approaches."
Naram nodded, though a part of him wanted nothing more than to run to his small room, curl under his thin blanket, and pretend he had never heard a demon's name. Instead, he stayed. Night deepened. They left the archive chamber and returned to the more familiar hall where petitioners sometimes came. The temple attendants lit extra lamps, as if they too sensed something pressing against the outer edges of the world. One by one, people arrived. A boy whose sister swore she saw a face in the oven fire. An old man who heard knocking on his roof, though no one was there. A woman who woke to find her bed moved half a finger's width across the floor, though she lived alone. Each story, taken alone, might be dismissed as imagination, accident, coincidence. Taken together, they formed a shape, a pressure. Naram listened, heart pounding as his master asked precise questions. Not, "Are you cursed?" or "What demon?" but "When did this start? Did anyone fall sick before it began? What did you fear that day? What did you say aloud that night?" Fear, the Asipu knew, was rarely random. It was drawn to moments. The boy's sister had seen the face in the fire the day after whispers of the possessed merchant spread through the market.
The old man's roof knocking began the night he joked that nothing scared him, not even the gods. The woman's moving bed followed a week of dreams in which she walked through doors that never led home. Threads. The temple felt less like stone, more like a net. Hours passed. The air in the hall grew warmer from so many lamps and bodies, yet sweat on Narm's back ran cold. There were times when the lamplight dimmed for a heartbeat as someone spoke, as if the room itself reacted to certain phrases. We are in the walls. We are in the stones. We are in the names. When at last the flow of visitors slowed and the sky outside had turned from black to the faintest suggestion of gray at the far horizon, the Asipu dismissed the last attendant and sat heavily on the floor. Naram sat opposite him, too tired to pretend calm. He asked quietly, "Will they come here? Into the temple?" The Asipu looked up at the ceiling. "They already have," he said. Naram's breath caught. "But tonight," his master went on, "we did something important. We listened without running. We recorded. When fear becomes story and story becomes tablet and tablet becomes knowledge, the seven lose a little of their power. They thrive when we shake and forget. They shrink when we remember and speak." Naram nodded slowly. The wall still felt too close, but the air felt slightly lighter, as if a tension had loosened by the simple act of telling.
The Asipu looked up at the ceiling. "They already have," he said. Naram's breath caught. "But tonight," his master went on, "we did something important. We listened without running. We recorded. When fear becomes story, and story becomes tablet, and tablet becomes knowledge, the seven lose a little of their power. They thrive when we shake and forget. They shrink when we remember and speak." Naram nodded slowly. The walls still felt too close, but the air felt slightly lighter, as if a tension had loosened by the simple act of telling. He thought of the scribe's dream, of the temple breathing, of tonight, this long, strange night, when the temple had in a way done exactly that. It had inhaled fear and exhaled words. It had drawn in stories of shadows and voices and breathless sleep, and turned them into something recorded and named. "Is that what we are?" Naram asked softly. "A pair of lungs for the city's fear?" The Asipu huffed a quiet, humorless breath that might have been a laugh if the night had been kinder. "In a sense," he said. "Yes. We breathe their terror in, so they can breathe again." Naram looked around the hall. The lamps burned steady now. The air was still. No scratching in the walls, no sudden dimming of light. The temple once more felt like what it was meant to be. A solid presence, rooted, unmoved. For tonight. He lay back on the cool floor, exhaustion finally overtaking anxiety. As his eyes drifted closed, he wondered if the breathing he thought he heard, deep within the stone, slow and steady, was real or only the echo of the scribe's words. He decided it did not matter. Whether the temple itself breathed or not, the darkness outside certainly did. And somewhere in that darkness, the seven listened. Not angry, not impatient, dawn rose over Nippur with a strange stillness, as though the world hesitated before inhaling again. A pale, uncertain light spilled across the rooftops and slid down the ziggurat's rigid walls. The breeze that usually carried scents of grain, river water, and morning fires was absent. Even the birds seemed reluctant to begin their daily cries. It was the sort of morning that felt like an ending, and in many ways it was. The Asipu stood at the temple's upper terrace, watching the muted sun struggle through a thin veil of dust. Behind him, the temple attendants whispered about omens,
about the strange quiet that had lingered in the city since the long, haunted night of petitions. Mothers had kept their children inside. Merchants had opened their stalls reluctantly, their gazes flicking toward dark corners. The usual chaos of city life had thinned into a cautious murmur.
But the Asipu sensed something deeper. The world he had spent his life defending, the system of belief, ritual, and ancient knowledge was beginning to fracture. He moved slowly down the temple steps, his body heavy with sleepless hours. Naram followed a few steps behind. The boy's eyes shadowed from exhaustion, but sharp with curiosity. He felt the same tension his master felt, though he could not fully name it. They entered the main hall, where the earlier petitioners had gathered. The lamps from last night still burned low, wax pooling like melted memories. The room smelled of incense, faint sweat, and clay dust, the scent of fear that had not yet fully faded. Attendants approached the Asipu carrying tablets, messages, requests for more incantations, and updates on the families who had visited. But before the Asipu could respond, an unfamiliar figure entered the hall. He wore garments unlike anything Naram had seen. A long robe of pale linen, embroidered not with Mesopotamian symbols, but with geometric shapes. He carried no staff, no amulets, no clay tablets. His hair was tied back with a leather cord. His face bore not reverence, but scrutiny. A stranger. From the West. A representative of a rising power. Behind him 2 men followed, scribes holding reed tablets, their posture confident, almost arrogant, as though they had come not to learn, but to judge. The man bowed stiffly. "I greet the great temple of Nippur," he said in an accent roughened by the desert. "I am Ishkun Dagan, envoy of the king." The Asipu bowed politely, but not deeply. "Your presence is unusual at early light." "We come," the envoy said, "because the king has heard troubling reports." "Reports?" the Asipu murmured. "Yes, of fear spreading through the city, of rituals whose smoke darkens the sky, of families who run to the temple claiming shadows breathe. The king wishes stability, not panic." Naram bristled. "People come because they are afraid. We only add to their fear," the envoy cut sharply. "With talk of demons, whispered incantations, rituals performed in the night." The Asipu's jaw tightened. "Fear does not come from us," he said. "Does it not?" Ishkun Dagan countered, pacing slowly. "For generations, priests like you have spoken the names of invisible terrors. You teach children to fear corners. You teach wives to fear dreams. You tell men their illnesses are spirits. You make them dependent on ceremonies."
Naram clenched his fists, but the Asipu remained still. "That is not true," the master said. "We make them aware. We guide them. We protect—" "You scare them," the envoy said again, "and the king will not tolerate it." Naram felt a strange cold settle into his chest. The envoy turned slightly, examining a row of clay tablets on the wall. "These stories of spirits, of voices in the walls, they weaken the city. They invite disorder. They make soldiers hesitant to march and farmers hesitant to plant." He turned back to the Asipu. "And now, your work is interfering with that of the Asu." The tension deepened. Idinson appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, expression tight with vindication. He stepped into the hall, nodding at the envoy as though to say, "Finally, someone sees reason."
The envoy gestured toward the physician. Idinson tells us that demonic medicine is old, outdated, dangerous. Naram felt the sting of betrayal, though he knew he shouldn't. Idinson had always been blunt about his beliefs. The Asipu's eyes darkened, but not with hatred, with resignation. "This is not the first time," he said softly. "Many kings have questioned the unseen. Many physicians have doubted the rituals. Yet still, the work continues." "Not for long," the envoy said. The hall fell silent. A slow drumbeat of dread began in Naram's chest. The envoy raised a hand, and one of his scribes stepped forward, unrolling a clay-inscribed decree. "By order of the king, effective immediately, the Temple of Demon Medicine is to restrict its operations. No rituals may be performed without the presence of an Asu. All incantations must be approved by the palace. All tablets describing demons are to be delivered for review." Naram felt the world tilting. "No," he whispered before he realized he'd spoken out loud. But the envoy heard him. He turned and looked at Naram with a faint smirk. "Little apprentice, do you disagree with the king's will?" The Asipu placed a hand on Naram's shoulder before he could answer. "Enough." But Naram stepped forward anyway.
"People will die," he said, voice trembling with a mixture of fear and fire. "You don't understand what you're tampering with." "On the contrary," the envoy replied calmly, "I understand perfectly. You cannot explain what you fight. You cannot show it. We see no demons. Therefore, they do not exist." "That is not how the unseen works," the Asipu said. "And that is not how kings work," the envoy replied. Idinson finally spoke. "Let reason rule the city," he said. "We will heal with herbs, oils, and laws, not with fires and chants." The Asipu turned to the physician. "Reason and ritual are not enemies." "No," Idinson said, "but your rituals make people act like enemies of their own minds." The two men stood inches apart, one shaped by the world of the body, the other shaped by the world of the spirit, locked in a conflict older than language. Then Ishkundagan delivered the final blow. "Demon medicine is hereby declared subordinate to the king's physicians. If there is an outbreak of fear, blame will fall on the temple." The envoy turned to leave, his scribes following with the decree in hand. The Asipu remained motionless as they exited. Naram stared at his master. "Is this the end?" he whispered. For the first time, he saw something he had never seen in the Asipu's eyes. Weariness. "Not yet," the master said, "but the world is changing. The old powers are slipping. New kings rise, new laws, new beliefs. And when the world stops fearing spirits—" He glanced toward the temple door, through which the envoy had just disappeared. "The spirits do not disappear." Naram swallowed hard. "What happens when people stop believing?" he asked. The Asipu walked to the shelf of forbidden tablets and rested his palm against the leather-wrapped one, the tablet Naram had read, the one tied to the seven. "They lose the protections belief once offered," he said. "The unseen does not vanish simply because a king wishes it. Rituals do not stop working because a law forbids them. All that happens is this."
He tapped the clay. The shadows deepen. Naram felt a chill. "So, what do we do?" he whispered. The Asipu turned to him. "We prepare," he said. Because when the city forgets the stones can breathe, the stones will breathe louder. Outside, the wind rose, soft, then sharp, rattling the edges of the temple door, as if something outside had been listening and smiling. Long before sunrise, before the first clay ovens were lit, and before the cries of merchants echoed across the markets of Nippur, the Asipu stood alone on the highest terrace of the temple. His silhouette was carved sharp against the paling sky, a black shape watching the world he had served his entire life quietly unwind beneath him. The city he saw was familiar: mud brick homes, narrow alleys, reed roofs, lines of livestock tied to posts, but something in its bones had shifted. The change was subtle, invisible to eyes that looked only at the surface. Yet to him, who lived half in the seen and half in the unseen, it was unmistakable. The city no longer believed, and that changed everything. Naram stood beside his master, shivering slightly in the morning cold. He was older now, not in years, but in weight. Nights of reading tablets, of listening to whispered stories, of feeling presences that pressed like cold fingers into the back of his skull had carved something into him. He no longer walked like a boy. He walked like someone who had glimpsed the world beneath the world. "Master," Naram asked softly, "what happens now? If the king forbids the rituals, if the people stop coming, what becomes of our work?" The Asipu didn't answer immediately. He let the moment breathe. Let the horizon light itself. Let the wind shift. Finally, he spoke. "Medicine changes," he said. "Empires rise. Kings demand new ways. Priests lose their place. Physicians claim authority. That is the way of the world." "But the demons?" Naram asked. "They remain," the Asipu said. "They do not require belief to exist, only opportunity." Naram swallowed hard. "So, what is the point of our work? If the city no longer listens, how do we protect them?" The Asipu smiled faintly, tiredly. "We adapt," he said, "as healers always have." He walked to the edge of the terrace, staring down at the bustling city. "Do you know how many times demon medicine has died?" he asked. "Dozens. In every age, in every kingdom." He pointed to the streets. "Once we treated everything as God's punishment. Then came practical healers with herbs. Then came priests of new deities who called our rituals blasphemy. Then came kings who outlawed incantations. Then came foreign armies who burned temples. Then came new languages, new writing, new ideas." He turned back to Naram. "But every time the world forgot the unseen, it returned." Naram frowned, confused. "Returned?" "Yes," the Asipu said. "Sometimes as fear, sometimes as myth, sometimes as nightmares, sometimes as diseases no one could explain, and sometimes—" he touched the leather-wrapped forbidden tablet. "Sometimes as the memory of words carved into clay, waiting to be spoken again." A soft breeze stirred the air. It carried with it a strange scent, dust, river water, and something else, something metallic, something old. People forget the shadows, but the shadows never forget the people. A temple bell chimed below, and the first priests of the day emerged, lighting incense and preparing offerings. Naram watched them with mixed emotions: respect, jealousy, fear, admiration.
Their work looked so peaceful compared to his own training. No demons, no whispers, no strange iciness crawling along the spine. But peace was an illusion. Niram knew that now. The Asipu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You asked me once why we keep the tablets instead of destroying them." "Yes," Niram whispered. "It is because knowledge is a kind of shield. When the world forgets, the shield breaks. When the world remembers, the shield holds." He lifted the forbidden tablet out of its leather cover and placed it gently on the stone railing. Once, the seven haunted this city. Ancient Asipu fought them with words and fire. Those rituals protected whole generations. He nodded toward the streets. But now the king forbids those rituals. They think fear disappears when forbidden. But fear is not a law. It is a season. It returns.
Naram's throat tightened. "Then what do we do?"
"We prepare the next generation," the Asipu said. "We teach quietly. We record carefully. We pass on what the world refuses to see." He pressed the tablet into Naram's hands. "And someday," he said, "the world will need this knowledge again." Naram stared at the tablet, feeling its weight, its history, its hum of dormant power. He imagined himself years from now, older, standing where his master stood, passing the same knowledge to someone else, whispering the same warnings, teaching the same rituals, maybe in secret, maybe in defiance, maybe in hope. He looked up at the Asipu. "Will the seven return?" he asked. The Asipu nodded slowly. "Always." A chill prickled Naram's spine. "How will we know when they do?" The Asipu smiled sadly. "You will know, because people will dream of doorways again, because shadows will lean, because children will say the walls breathe, because physicians will have no explanation, because kings will have no power over the unseen." He turned toward the rising sun. "And because fear, real fear, will once more have shape." The wind picked up, brushing their robes. In the distance, a dog barked at something no one could see. On the horizon, a dust cloud swirled in a strange spiral. A crow flew overhead, circling 3 times before heading north. Small signs. But to the trained eye, to the inherited knowledge in the Asipu's bloodline, to the silent whisper inside Naram's chest, they were warnings. The Asipu breathed deeply, letting the morning air fill him with the bitter sweetness of ending and beginning. "This world of clay and shadow," he said softly, "will always be caught between the seen and unseen. But as long as even one healer remembers the old words, the darkness will never fully win."
Naram closed his fingers around the tablet, a quiet vow forming in his chest. He would remember. He would learn. He would listen, not because he wanted power, but because the unseen world whispered, and because someone had to answer. The Asipu turned to leave. Naram followed. Behind them, the sun finally broke free of the horizon, spilling light over Nippur, golden, honest, unaware of the shadows hiding beneath every rooftop. A new day had begun, but the legacy of the demon doctors would never truly end, because fear remained, stories remained, the unseen remained, and somewhere deep in the forgotten places of the world, ancient spirits stirred, waiting patiently for the moment when belief would falter and the shadows could step forward again.